Okay, start again then. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have what appears to be a small agenda, but we do seem to make it longer than we need, I think. Item regarding Euro Foods has been withdrawn off the agenda, pending some further negotiations with officers. So therefore, we're down to, I think, 6 applications. So, back to my crib sheets. Thank you for all for attending this meeting of the Planning Committee. Before we begin, I want to address some housekeeping measures. The agenda and reports for this meeting are available on the Council's website. The meeting becomes inaccessible to the public on YouTube. Then I will adjourn to allow for reconnection. If access cannot be restored, then the remaining business with speakers will be considered at a time and date to be arranged. And if business without speakers will continue to be heard. So apologies, I have Councillor Sarah Jane Cooper, Councillor Harris, and I think Councillor Robertson is now here. Yes. I'm watching you, Angela. You're going to go stuff and I can't start coughing, I'll kick it out. Right. Are there any further apologies on those two, please? No. Declaration of interest. This is a point on the agenda when any member or officer has any interest to any item on the agenda. I'm aware of 2. Councillor Rassab. Right. And Councillor Giza Hussain.
Yeah.
Councillor Nazir.
Yeah. Planned list item 6 and 5 or 5 and 6.
Right. Just for the record, Councillor Nazir lives at one of the houses and lives next door to one of the others. So that's the way to do things. And Councillor Councillor Rassab has declared interest because it is a close family member. And Councillor Giza Hussain called in the original application before he was a member of this committee. So I advised him it would be better if he didn't participate in the debate. So thank you all for that. I have the minutes of the 2nd of December. Are we happy with those? Let's move by Councillor Rassab, seconded by Councillor Bott.
No, I've got a question.
I'm sorry, Paul.
I've got a question on the minutes, Chair.
Please, carry on.
Under deputations and petitions, can I thank the officer for getting back to me on Low Avenue?
Good.
Right. And the other issue is he's breaking the law now, this landlord is, right? If this goes to court and we do take him to court, has the judge got the power to override the planning inspector?
That depends. On a planning matter, I would probably say no. But on a civil matter, I would probably say yes. The only person to my knowledge that can override the planning inspector would be the High Court in an appeal. Is that correct? Somebody tell me if I'm talking rubbish or just made it up.
I think that sounds about right, Councillor. If it's a judge on civil matters, then that would be relating to the civil matters. If it was a planning inspector on planning matters, then the only person that could override would be the Secretary of State.
Yeah. So the short answer is it depends on what the judge felt he could intervene with, Paul. But if we want to have a conversation off air, so to speak, I'm sure we'll be able to come to a solution for you. Thank you. I should have said initially, Happy New Year to all of those present and not present. Perhaps those are virtual. Okay then, item 5 is local government access to information 1985. This is a resolution that is required if we have items in the private session, which we do have. At that point in time, the public will be excluded. Can I also advise members and congratulate Stuart Crossan, who's here this evening, who has been appointed as head of the policy unit, long-standing, long-suffering probably, member of the planning team, went to the dark side onto policy, but it's always a pleasure to see Stuart, who has been certainly an exemplary officer and continues to be so along with the others. So good for you, Stuart. And he did say to me when I said, because policy always tends to be something that can conflict with planning, and he said, well, ask me in 12 months whether you're still pleased. So I've written that in my diary. Okay, then. The item then is item 6, which is the addition or the proposal to ask your permission whether or not you wish to add to the list of buildings of local architectural and historic interest, the old Walsall Local History Centre, which of course is in Essex Street in Walsall. So we have a presentation on that.
you. Yeah, my name's Stuart Cross and work for the planning policy team, as you now know, and I'll be becoming team leader very shortly. Presentation is, I'll share that with you, but it's the first site is the local history centre, which is on Essex Street off Bloxwich Road. Formerly a school built in 1904, and we're looking to add it to our local list. I'll just share the map with you.
Exceptionally good at policy, perhaps a little shortfall on technology.
The signal's not very good, I don't think. Is it coming up there? Right, look, there it is. Okay. It's Essex Street, opposite Norfolk Place, where the council depot used to be. The site used to be a lot larger. It's sort of the buildings to the south there are Abu Bakr School, and that's in separate ownership. The council site is edged in red there. The Black Country authorities have received funding from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities as part of their local heritage list campaign. This campaign encourages nominations of important historic buildings for inclusion in the local list. The report before you sets out the details of this local list project and provides details of how people can engage with the process. Scroll down. Got an aerial photo. I'll try and zoom in for you. The aerial photo's quite useful in that it shows what remains of the original design and building. Hope you can see, but where the mouse pointer is, there's an extension sort of there, and there might be one here. And they're not original, but other than that, it's got a sort of symmetrical design, original design, Victorian, low eaves, steep roof. We've got octagonal wings either side of the building, which remain intact, and much of it, you know, is still there from 1904, really. I'll just scroll down to the next slide. We've got the original plans for the building still available. We think it was made by a local architect and surveyor, H.E. Lavender, who worked for the Walsall School Board for the first years of the 20th century, and is likely the designer of the building. Most famous for building the new workhouse infirmary on Pleck Road, now known as the former Board of Guardians offices south of Manor Hospital. And that building is Grade 2 listed. This is the part of the design that shows the octagonal wings, which we'll see on the photo shortly. Window details. That's the front elevation facing Essex Street. As you can see, a lot of details on the front elevation there, and we've got that low eaves and sort of steep roof, Victorian design. You can just see on the edge there, we've got you know, a more modern extension to the building. This is the rear elevation, which faces Abu Bakr School to the south. Then you can just about, so I'll try and zoom in. That's the one of the octagonal wings on the side. This one, I think, is facing Kent Street. Is it the other side? This might be the other side, actually. This is the eastern elevation. And again, the octagonal wing. And then within the building, we can see that much of it remains as it was built. There's not been a lot of modification to it. And the bits you can see, like the ducting here and the lights, it's all stuff that could be reversible. There's not been much, if any, damage really internally. And we've even got, you know, the struts, the original struts are all there, the roof is intact. Then the final photo, if I scroll down here, parquet wood floor, which is still intact in parts of the building. So the report provides more detail of the architectural interest and makes the case that this Victorian design building is worthy of inclusion in the local list. It sets out the local historical interest with information about the likely architect, H.E. Lavender, and we request the committee agree to the permanent inclusion of the former Walsall Local History Centre on the list of buildings of local architectural and historic interest. The listing is sought in order to protect the building from future development that could result in the loss of a heritage asset entirely or loss of historic fabric of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Let me make this clear. What you're being asked is whether you agree that it should be locally listed or not. It's a decision of this committee. Yes, it's a nice building, but I have to say my own part, I find it difficult to see what else it could be used for except its previous use, which was a school, which of course now wouldn't pass muster with Ofsted and everything else. I did inquire from officers who said they would be prepared to see some residential here, but of course, like anything else, as soon as you list something, it becomes or can become a liability. And in the locality, I think you can look around the borough, listed buildings have benefited in some cases from a box of Swan Vestas, and they've been burnt down because they were empty. I can quote a few of those. Jabez Cliff was one. One in George Street was the other. It's the old leather factory. The boat building, it goes on. However, the decision is yours this evening, and I'd be interested to see what you have to say. Councillor Robertson, it's in your ward.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would very much support the idea of this being a listed building. I've had some conversations with the Aberbacker School next door. Did at one stage express an interest in that particular building. Maybe that's something to pursue, because certainly those octagonal extensions, the slates are slipping off very, very steep roof. So I just put that into the pot for information. I certainly very much support it. My colleague,
I may be wrong, but I thought the Aberbacker land was in actual fact up for sale, or had been. The reason I say that is because I know I was the leader of the council when this was in an auction, and I received a call from a potential bidder who said it had been withdrawn. I knew nothing about that, but then again, you know, it's not surprising. However, I did establish, yes, it had been withdrawn because one of our officers felt it might be worthy of listing, and we couldn't sell it with that overhang or hanging over the head of the building. So that's the background to it, and that was probably about two years ago. Mark Statham.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you're asking us to make a decision for the newer members and the ones who are not so au fait with it. When we talk about the future liabilities, what sort of order of magnitude are we committing this council to going forward, just for really, I'm not saying a vanity project, but for something that could have material value in other respects to this council?
I can give you an example of what was a nationally listed barn in Aldridge, which was burned down at least once or twice. And the repair cost was £56,000 just to put it back to where it was, which was derelict. We have a duty that basically, as the authority to prosecute people who do not look after their listed buildings, we too fall into that category. This is a listed building here. Believe me, I had to move hell and high water to get a camera on the wall and everything else. We can't use this building for us at the moment for council meetings because the ventilation isn't good enough for all councillors to be in it. And I said, well, get it sorted. Oh, we can't, it's a listed building. It does come with, you get all the pain and none of the gain, in my view. But, you know, I'm a Philistine when it comes to this. But I do believe that Aberbacker, somebody perhaps confirmed, that they did have it up for sale. And I thought the marriage value of the two would be better. But I don't know the area that well. I know the building, of course. Can anybody, Kissy, you nodded your head, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. As far as my knowledge is that it is up for sale.
Yeah, my worry is that when you board it up, somebody says, oh, let's set light to that. Well, let's go and be squatters in there. But Councillor Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I echo what you said earlier. I mean, I won't be supporting this because I think we need to look where this building sits. It sits in a residential area. We need to look at future uses. If we were to locally list this, it would then cause any future purchaser problems when they would come before any committee or apply for any planning permission regarding to convert that, which I think would more than unlikely for this property be residential. Yes, we've been awarded £70,000, and I think we're rushing into this by But more thought needs to be given to the process of what properties we've got in this town and what do need locally listing. I think by locally listing this particular one, it will totally put off, because eventually I'm sure it's the plan of this local authority to dispose of this site, any potential buyers and any future development. And it will just become another derelict building, which will be vandalised. And as you quoted there earlier, other properties that are obviously being vandalised, etc., with fire. And who will have to put up the bill? This local authority will. So I, for one, will not be supporting this local listing at this time. As I've said, I think we as an authority, we need to put a lot more thought into how, if it's about this money that we've been afforded and we must spend it or we need to spend it, then we need to put a lot more thought into it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Vera Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Robinson mentioned that the school was interested in it. Is this still the case, or was that something that happened in the past?
I did have an interest, but I'll just confirm that in actual fact, the Aberbacker land and buildings has and is, I believe, up for sale. So therefore, Councillor Samra is quite right that whatever happens there could impinge upon this particular building. The one that sticks in my craw is the one in Freer Street that we asked the tenant to move about 6 years ago. And we've been paying for scaffolding ever since, which I think is up to about 150 grand at the moment. But there we are. That's just one of my pet hates. Anybody else then? Guess they're saying?
Yeah, I know this area quite well. It is residential area, and this building sits there. I think if we tie ourselves in by listing it, it'd be difficult for us in the future. Like you said, Mike, a lot of empty buildings in the past, derelict for a long time, have been either torched or arsoned, and it's caused great damage. So it's a catch-22 situation. I think I'm of the view that we shouldn't list it and have more options open in the future for other avenues.
I have to say, I think that in another part of the borough, it could probably be a substantial dwelling in the middle of a field. I don't know. I mean, a colleague of mine whose mother used to be the mayor's secretary here lives at a church, which is now residential. But, you know, at the end of the day, sadly, I think the attraction, whatever happens to Aberbacker's land, will actually designate what might happen here. It isn't about the money on this building. You know, if we're getting money from the Levelling Up Fund, whatever they call it nowadays, they keep changing the name of the department to keep me on my toes, I think. But I think it is not about the money. This, as I said to you before, was in an auction to be sold by the council, but was withdrawn at the last minute because somebody had said it could be worth listing. But the decision is with this committee, unlike the national listing, which is out of our hands. So really, I'm in the hands of this committee. Councillor Staden.
Yeah, just on that, Chair, I think Councillor Samra and Councillor Hussain have put forward compelling arguments about options tying our hands. I agree with them both. I won't be supporting this on the basis of there are too many legal consequences in just putting a mark on a piece of paper that has obvious consequences to both the residents there and what we as residents of Walsall have to endure over future years.
I can confirm, just had somebody who's not in the room sent me a text. Aberbacker Boys School offers in the region of 1.6 million. So it is up for sale. So I think that, you know, what's being said is all right. Councillor Nawaz.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't live too far from there, just around the corner really. And I respect the heritage and the history of our borough and these buildings. However, in this case, I feel we would be more wise to actually look after that ourselves. My argument is, once we've listed it, we tie our hands behind our backs. If an application comes forward to this committee that requires something to be done to that building, we can look at that application and see if it's appropriate or not. I think if we go down the line of it being a listed building, then we end up tying our hands in the future. We've got a huge problem with housing in the borough. And if this land was to come up the whole site for housing in the future, Do we really want to be tied in by the fact that this will stop that development going forward because it's a listed building? I think not.
How big's the site still? The whole site, the red line. Do you know how big the red line is? No, okay, fine. Okay. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. The only other I hear what people are saying about tying one's hands. I don't know whether any approach has been made to the North Walsall primary schools along the road, because they've had to expand into Essex Street, provide a library and things, expand the school. I'm just wondering whether they were aware of the fact that this was potentially something that might be available.
Well, certainly in a public auction, but you make the point, but of course, a school has a limited budget. And if they were to move into a locally listed building, then they too would have the problem that any purchaser would have, if that were the case. But, you know, there's no reason why they shouldn't be approached if they want to use it for a school purpose. I think, to be fair, although it's very well preserved inside, it's a school. Councillor Bott.
Chair, do we know the cost to running this centre for 12 months?
It's empty now. We've moved all the archives, as I understand it, to the central library. So perhaps I shouldn't be saying that in a public meeting, but it is empty and is currently under our stewardship, looking after its welfare at this point in time and going forward. Councillor Crabb.
Having heard all the arguments, I agree with most of them. And actually, we shouldn't list it. Can I move that we agree not to include it as part of the local history centre? It's part of the listing.
Have a seconder on that. All those in favour of that, please. Anybody against? Councillor Vera Waters and sorry, picking against. That is approved then, or not approved, I should say. Alison, Sergeant, are you with us? Somebody? Forget who's with us now from the legals.
Chair, it's Nicola Alcock here.
Nicola, a pleasure to.
Hello. Just for the benefit of everybody here tonight, members have resolved to not list the item. To not list the building as per the report, and so we're going against the request.
Changed your name since I saw you last?
Sorry?
You've changed your name since I saw you last?
I think I had changed it last time, actually, Chair, but you kept calling me Alison then.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Good to have you with us. Moving on then to the next item, which says here, looking for his agenda. Right, we go on to the plans list then, and we have items for speakers. I understand the first item, the gentleman is attending remotely. One remotely and one's here.
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
The gentleman attending remotely is already in the meeting.
Okay, fine. I did advise members that item number 1 has been taken off the agenda and will be on the next agenda, which is February. Okay, then we move on then to item 2, which is Hartshorn Motor Services in Bentley Lane, Bentley Mill Close. Michael?
Thank you, Chair. Mike Brereton, Group Manager for Planning at Walsall Council. I'll just share the screen. So this proposal is for the site shown on the screen off of Bentley Mill Close, which is off Bentley Mill Way. You can see the site contains a number of buildings that are in operation by the applicant currently, and the proposal is for demolition of those existing buildings and redevelopment of the site, including the erection of a new vehicle workshop, body shop and associated office, HGV sales, vehicle wash bay, service areas and car parking. So that's an aerial view, so you can get a bit more context in terms of how that site looks on the ground. There are a number of trees surrounding the site, none of which are protected. So that's the existing site layout again, just in plan form. This is the proposed site plan, so you can see that the buildings would be demolished and the new building located further north of the site with HGV parking to the southern boundary. The existing site section, just so you can understand the relationship between the buildings and neighbouring buildings, and the proposed sections in terms of how they would relate in terms of height and proximity to other buildings. So in terms of its overall height and mass, it's well related to the site, we feel, in terms of its nature to contain the existing operational buildings. So these are the proposed elevations of the buildings. They're very functional, which you'd expect of the operation that's intended. Ground floor plan, again, very much what you'd expect for the operation. First floor plan, roof plan, and this is the proposed demolitions plan. So what the applicants have confirmed to us is that there would be some phasing of demolition on site so that their existing operations could continue in some form whilst the remainder of the site is carried out. That's the existing site from Bentley Mill Close. Another view of the existing site internally of the existing buildings. View towards Wrexham Avenue. That's the existing MOT Test Bay. Part of the view of the southern tree-lined boundary. Some of the older buildings on site. The existing offices on site. 4 offices on site. Neighbouring units on Bentley Mill Close, so it's in the industrial employment-related area. Existing yard looking north, more of the tree-lined boundary to the south. Again, to the south of some of the units close up to the boundary, and some views towards the western boundary. So just some detail then about the proposal. It would be 900 square metres of gross floor space, and it is proposed 24-hour use. The full-time employee numbers would increase from 75 to 90, and it would be the redevelopment of a brownfield site, which is obviously positive and policy compliant. There is the potential to consider to service electric powered vehicles in future, so that's looking at the longevity of the site moving forward. It's a portal framed structure, as you saw on the plans. There would be auto vehicle gates plus CCTV for security purposes. There's a number of service bays for the HGVs, etc. There would be a 20-bay layover area, 46 car parking spaces, including 3 accessible bays and service provision for electric vehicle charging, and a covered 10-cycle shelter. The existing 2-bay MOT workshop that was shown on some of those photographs is proposed to be retained and extended by a further bay and refurbished into a new body shop facility. There would also be a new 2.4 metre high weld mesh powder coated black Paladin security fence to prevent climbing along Bentley Mill Close and to the eastern boundary. Gates will be electronically operated and sliding automatic with a security kiosk at the end of Bentley Mill Close with the CCTV I mentioned earlier. A number of trees would be removed from the site. All are reported as category C, being low quality trees. And there are no protected trees, as I mentioned earlier, on the site. The site is allocated potential high quality employment land under the policy IND 2 in the site allocation document, and it's considered to be a sustainable site in close proximity to junction 10 of the motorway. The design reflects the existing buildings in the area of commercial character, as you saw in the photographs. Wrexham Avenue residential nearest proposals increases from a current 40-metre distance to a distance of 86 metres, and of course the boundaries are screened somewhat by some of the existing trees. So whilst the HGV layover parking is closer, acoustic fence and repairs as required in the submitted noise assessment would help to mitigate some of those additional impacts along that boundary. There's also no spray booth proposed, so that's been removed from the proposal. And there is a condition in the report that does look to restrict some of those hours of operation. Ground conditions can be dealt with by way of investigation and remediation, and conditions can be dealt with in that manner. Ecology has been addressed, and again, safeguarding and enhancement conditions are set out in the report. So the arboriculture report did set out some tree removal, as I've mentioned just now, and the tree officer has confirmed that there's no objection to the removal of those trees, subject to conditions set out in the supplementary paper, which I'll run through after. So in terms of flooding, there's no concerns, no objections from Southern Trent either. The noise assessment provided is in agreement with, the environmental protection team are in agreement with the submitted noise assessment. There's no significant air quality impacts, and asbestos can be updated as per the recommendation. The lighting can be dealt with as well, should members agree with the officer recommendation. In terms of the travel plan, the discussions around the necessity to secure that by way of a Section 106 or condition, the recommendation has been updated to allow that discussion to continue if it's needed, although we have had updated comments from the local highway authority to suggest a condition may be able to be secured in this instance. In terms of the MOT testing hours, that would be restricted by condition as set out in the report between 8 to 6 p.m. Mondays and Fridays inclusive, and 8 to 1 p.m. Saturdays, and not on Sundays or public holidays. So in terms of consultee feedback, the query about land ownership that's set out in the report from the council's asset management team relates to land that sits outside of the site boundary, so it's the access running up to the site, which has been in use for many years. So we don't feel that that has a material impact on the current proposal. Cadent gas assets nearby, so there are conditions recommended. Public lightings set out in the recommendation to be dealt with. The tree officer has, as I've mentioned, raised no objections subject to conditions, and other consultees raised no objections subject to conditions. There have been representations from 6 residents on noise pollution, hours, lighting and spray from vehicle washing and fencing. All of those have been considered and addressed in the report, and there are mitigating measures set out in conditions where it's been deemed necessary to do so. So in terms of the supplementary paper, just by way of clarification, prior approval for demolition has already been granted. The tree officer, fire service and Natural England have no objections or further comments, and Severn Trent Water accepts the flood risk assessment. We're now just waiting for confirmation from the lead local flood authority. So the recommendation has been updated as set out in the supplementary paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. I have 2 speakers. I have Mr. Shuker, who is in the meeting and attending virtually. I intend to take him first in case we lose him, technology and everything. And he'll have 2 minutes to speak in accordance with the Constitution. So, Mr. Shuker, I'll take you first, and as soon as you start speaking, I will start my clock. You're on mute, Paul.
Yeah. Am I? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, far away.
Check. Okay, great. Sorry, Happy New Year, and thanks, Chair, for obviously allowing me to ring in on this call. Yeah, I'm really delighted for Hartshorn, really, in terms of the committee report that's been the case officer eloquently put together there by Mr. Burton as well. Really, just to reinforce, this is about reinvesting in the infrastructure that's already at the site, and really moving Hartshorn to a transition to EV vehicles and other true fossil fuel move into that, and therefore they need to upscale infrastructure existing to deal with that in the future. This is all about the decarbonisation of the road network and the vehicles. So they are looking to invest significant amount of money, as they have done in other parts of the West Midlands, really to put the area on the map. Also, this facility will be the HQ for Hartshorn in the UK. Well, so again, it's just cementing the retaining the employment on the site, whilst also equally, and as set out in the committee report, we've balanced the economic and social benefits of the scheme against the environmental harm. I think one thing to make sure members are aware of is the site at the moment has got very limited restrictions on it from a planning point of view. We are putting significant safeguards in with an agreement with the officers over the last couple of months to make sure that these issues are addressed in the future, and control of for enforcement. So this is a really great scheme. I'm delighted to be able to present this tonight. We fully endorse what the recommendation says. It's a very good report, comprehensive. It confirms that the scheme is completely in accordance with the NPPF, the UDP, and obviously the site allocation documents as well. So hopefully members will see that, and it's a great scheme to move the new year on with. Thank you.
Yeah, 7 seconds left. Okay, thank you. And now I'll take Mr. Paul Guttridge. Same 2 minutes.
Okay. We have had ongoing problems with this company since the planning application BCW 440 for the Mot Bay in '95. They were granted this application with certain conditions which they have constantly contravened. We have made many complaints regarding the hours of work, excessive noise, doors left open, radios playing during the night, horns sounding, all not within their planning agreement. Meeting with the company secretary and the general manager at my house, this meeting was attended by a number of the neighbours. We informed them of all our concerns that had arisen and agreed that our concerns were valid, inasmuch as they promised that this would be addressed. The next few weeks all was okay, but it became evident this was short-lived and the company returned to their status quo. All this, together with our letter of objection to the new planning application, which has already been submitted, ratifies the total disregard that the company has had for the residents of Wrexham Avenue, which has been here since 1936, long before the company. Our objections to this proposal are based on the facts that they have never adhered to their previous applications, inasmuch as they have constantly contravened their agreements. We have letters dated 24th of January 95, which lays out their conditions, these being hours of use, closure of doors, etc. We have further correspondence from the company addressing numerous complaints, but they have continued to disregard the residents. At no time has the company given any regard to the local residents. This proposal would affect us all with the light and noise pollution and possible devaluation of our properties. We understand the need for progress, but not to the detriment of the local residents. Respectfully request that you consider our objections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tridge. I have to say, I've got an error on my paper. It said that the two speakers were in support of the application. So just for the record, we normally take the objectors first and then the applicant afterwards, or supporters. So we've gone out of order, but we haven't gone out of order enough to violate the Constitution. Right, those are the speakers for and against. Are there any questions to the speakers, please? Mr. Samler.
Thank you, Chair. To the objector here, you said that this business has been causing you nightmares and the residents. Can you expand a little bit on that, please?
Well, we've had radios playing at 2 o'clock in the morning. We've had workmen using de-suiter air grinders outside early in the morning outside the Mot Bay. We've had people moving HGVs, moving them around. If the doors are not open, they just sit there banging on the horns until somebody opens the doors. Now, in the daytime, you expect this, but not late at night, not early in the morning. Also on a Sunday afternoon, summertime, you're sitting outside having a glass of wine, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and all you've got is some idiot down there banging 7 bells with a big hammer out of tanks and goodness knows what, thrown in the scrap bin. This is basically contravening our privacy. We have it all the time. We've had many an argument with them. We phoned the security people up when this has happened, and all they've done is turn around and say, phone the management in the. What can we do?
Ask, have you ever complained to the local authority or about this?
Yes, we complained to the environmental people about them working the hours of out of hours on the MOT. They turned around and said, oh, they can do it. That was it. Yet we proved to them and said, I've got letters dating from the original Black Country Development Corporation, which states quite categorically hours of work. They're in black and white, yet the environmental office turned around and said, they are allowed to use it. I said, no, they're not. It states quite categorically, use states that they cannot use it outside those hours, whether it be for an MOT or whether it's for repair work. They can't use it, and they are doing it on a regular basis.
I'll come to that condition when we come to the officers. I was a member of the planning committee on BCDC, that was many years ago. Councillor Robertson.
Okay, could I have you actually listed the, the things that have happened? Reported this to environmental health people. I mean, have you actually done a timetable? Listed all the various
No,
problems?
because it's been going on for so long. If I was to do that, I'd have a guardians because we haven't recorded anything. Simple reason, it was just a waste of time. What we used to do, we used to phone the security up or phone the office, their offices the next morning. We've got letters that support a lot of our complaints. I've got a file here that supports everything they've said.
Just looking for the planning history, which would give us relevant. Oh, here we are.
Can I ask a question, Chair, while you're
Sure,
looking for that?
Councillor Noaz, yeah.
Just to the supporter of the application, the gentleman who objects has gone through the impact on him and residents. Can you please respond? I mean, are these things happening? And the gentleman, I've got no doubt he's a decent person.
Can you repeat that, please?
I'm asking the
Sorry, the
I'm
question
sorry.
is to Mr. Shuker. I don't want to be the agent or an employee of the business, Mr. Shuker, so I apologise for that. The question my colleague is asking, has these been addressed by the company? And if so, why haven't you dealt with it?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm an agent for Hartshorn, so I'm not an employee of the company. One thing I'd say, yes, well, I can apologise if these things are occurring to the gentleman here and some of the residents. However, we have gone through a due diligence application, providing all the noise assessment and the various other assessments to look at this site in relation to those amenity issues which have been identified by the gentleman. However, there's been, as those reports suggest, there's been no recorded abatement issues, and so I haven't seen anything that's been recorded put forward to the council. If they are being made, those comments to the council, they will be investigated and looked into. What I would say is we have put the same safeguards to go back to the local authority in terms of the enforcement to look at that. So we have put those safeguards in place in relation to the technical evidence that has been submitted. So there is a mandate there for if there are complaints to be made, they can be investigated. And those mechanisms are there clearly in the recommendations from the officer.
Okay. Well, I'll address that.
I was also going to say that the facility has been there for a significant length of time, and I appreciate that the gentleman said that it's not been there as long as the residents. I think it has been there for a significant length of time, as you can see from the type of architecture that's there. So they are a long-established use. They are a long-established employer, which brings benefit to the wider community. Well, obviously, we do take those responsibilities to the neighbours in a diligent way and fair. And I know the particular the group MD there, he will be happy to speak to the residents on a regular basis to address these, like he rightly said.
Whilst I accept that, Mr. Shuker, it has been over 20 years because I was on the BCDC planning committee when God's dog was alive. But the interesting thing is that the hours of operation on page 73 of the report are different to what's now being proposed. So I'll come to that when I come to the officer's questions. Just for reference, gentlemen and ladies, the bottom of page 73 shows the proposed hours of operation, which were designated on the original application, and what Mr. Guttridge is saying that those hours have not been complied with. I think that's where we got to. We'll come to that when we've got somebody from environmental health. Are there any other questions to the speakers, please? No? I'll move on to questions to our officers then. Can I just ask you to address these hours of operation, Michael, in relation to what was, as I see it, the approved hours of 8 till 1, 7 days a week, which states 6 in the morning till 10 at night. And the last planning application was 8 till 6 and 8 till 1 on a Saturday, not to include Sundays. But now we're looking at a 24-hour operation. Can you comment on that to members, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the previous planning permissions on the site, the one of relevance that's proposed to be carried forward on this current proposal is in relation to the MOT testing bay that's to be retained.
Right.
So those hours would be carried forward. So the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays, Fridays, 8 till 1 p.m. Saturdays, and nothing on Sundays or public holidays. Previous hours of operation that relates to, I think it was a spray booth.
We're demolished.
That's to be demolished. So those hours wouldn't be carried forward because there'd be no necessity for it.
Alice?
The area that you were referring to in the report was page 73, is that right, Councillor?
Correct.
Yeah, and those are the objectors' comments, which just refer to the discrepancy in the hours of work, but I think the discrepancy is perhaps because one's relating to the MOT booth, one's relating to the spray booth, and there's no restraints, as I understand it, on the remainder of the sites. It's just for those two buildings.
Okay. Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Chairman. In the report, the council's tree officer objected and stated that the loss of the trees that are planned to be removed would have an amenity effect, amenity value, which will be residual for quite some years. Seemed to skip past that and sort of said, oh, well, because I haven't seen a supplementary sort of paper. He seemed to just say, oh, well, the tree officer doesn't object now. But do we take it then that these trees are now going to be replaced and that the tree officer's objection has been withdrawn?
The supplementary paper says the council's tree officer has no objections to the proposal due to the lack of significant arboricultural implications. However, recommends planning conditions in respect of soft landscaping, including replacement trees in accordance with the recommendations included in the supporting arboricultural impact assessment dated August 21. So what he's saying is happy that the ones being taken out will be replaced, but there will also be some soft planting as well for screening for the residents. That's roughly where he's got to, I think. Councillor Samra?
Yeah, Chair, just back to Michael. Michael, I think for the benefit of everyone here and the residents, just clarification on the hours. So the hours on, as you say, the current use outside the MOT bay and the MOT bay itself, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So the hours for the MOT testing bay would be carried forward because that's still forming part of their proposed continued and enhanced operation.
And they are what, Michael? So we're clear on that?
Yeah, let me just go back to that for you. Sorry. I think it's the last condition, so I should be quite quick. It is 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays to Fridays inclusive, and 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays, and at no other time on Sundays or bank holidays, public holidays. Sorry. The other hours that were referred to relating to the spray booth are no longer relevant because the spray booth is to be demolished as part of the proposal. So the remainder of the site, the operation of the remainder of the site as it stands is already uncontrolled. So we're not proposing to impose new restrictions on an already operational site, if that helps.
Just for clarity, when we say uncontrolled, so the remainder where they obviously do the repairs to the vehicles, we've heard they're making noise, etc. That could possibly, that at the moment could, if you wanted to, open 24 hours. Is that what you're telling us?
That's correct, Councillor.
There's no restrictions on that whatsoever?
That's correct, yeah. There is separate environmental legislation that is in place to deal with noise impacts and amenity impacts, as alluded to and covered in the report. That's right, yeah.
Just for the benefit of this application, can this committee, if it were minded to support the recommendation, condition that? Or is that not part of the application because it's already existing?
Yeah, that's basically it, Councillor. When we look at enhancement and redevelopment of existing operational sites, we have to do the weighing exercise of what the impacts are currently and what the impacts would be if they were to continue that operation without any involvement of planning, the planning process. So what we can't look to do is impose additional restrictions where a site can already operate without that need to be restricted. And just to support that, of course, this application is supported by the noise assessment that does state that that's not necessary. If there was a case made in the evidence submitted to say that that was going to be necessary, then that's at the point that we can then start to consider whether additional restrictions could be brought in. But at this stage, based on the evidence before us, we don't consider that would be necessary or reasonable to meet the tests for conditions.
I accept that you don't consider that these extra restrictions may be needed. But just for clarity, Chair, if you don't mind, if this committee were minded to support the application, could we condition the hours that are uncontrolled at the moment? That's my question. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Samra, if we were to try and impose a condition on those areas of the site that are currently unrestricted, it wouldn't meet the tests for putting on a condition.
Yeah, basically there is other legislation through the Environmental Department where this could be rectified if it were to be the issue were to be escalated. What Alison is saying is quite correct. In view of the fact they've been operating with those hours of operation for over 20 years, any inspector would throw it back at us and say, I'm sorry, mate, you know, you're too late for that. It's got established use. So,
and also there's other legislation that covers noise and impacts, i.e. environmental protection.
Yeah, that's what I said, environmental health. Steve?
Chair, on a number of other applications we've had at this committee, we've been able to condition that a committee be set up or an arrangement whereby the contractor, the business, have to set up a liaison group with the local residents that meets on a regular basis to talk about issues and problems that have occurred. And I was wondering, and again, I'm seeking advice here, whether we can condition a liaison group being set up. And I appreciate we've kind of missed the opportunity to ask the agent whether that would be agreeable, but I didn't know if we could actually condition it.
Yes, we can. But we would have to say that, well, we'd have to get an agreement from the company, but I think it's important that we indicate that we'd like that to happen. But if they turn around and say no, then of course we won't be able to do it.
I was just going to say, Chair, we could put an advisory on the decision notice. We can't condition it because obviously it relies on a third party, i.e. the residents, engaging in that as well, which I'm sure they will. But
yeah, what we could do, you see, Steve, along those lines, we could say that there is a meeting with the liaison committee every 6 months, and that the minutes of that meeting be referred to our environmental health department for noise pollution. They could then have a track record of what the issues may or may not be.
On another point, Chair, we heard from the resident here that they've actually written and complained to the Environmental Health Department. What I'm surprised about is that there's no comment in the report from the Environmental Department that they have had complaints about the site in terms of noise or any disruption. So what are our officers doing in terms of dealing with complaints, whether it comes under community protection or environmental health? They've not reported that or made any comment in this planning application at all.
I think one of the issues that raised concerns by the residents was the spray booth, which of course officers will take on board. That is now not going to be there, so therefore that's removing one area of concern. But having said that, it would appear that the noise assessment that's been put forward to environmental protection seems to be acceptable to them. It's like double yellow lines. They're only any good if somebody enforces them. It's no good putting, speed limits on roads unless there's people to enforce them. So I think what we have to do, and I'm minded to support the application, is to add the advisory condition that we would request the company to set up a residents liaison committee, which should meet at least every 6 months. And the minutes of those meetings and concerns raised be sent to our environmental department for their action should it be necessary. And I'd like to add that into the conditions. It is delegated anyway, as you can see on the supplementary. I move that. Yes.
Alison, there was a comment from the residents in relation to the boundary fence and that being in a poor state of repair. It does say it's referred to in the report, but I can't find it anywhere. Is that going to be replaced? It's on sort of top of page 74. Unfortunately, the agent can't speak, I realise.
Councillor, I'm just having a look through for you. The report mentions the concrete panel fence, if maintained in good repair, would provide a very good acoustic screen. I'm just seeing if there's any other reference for you.
can't see anything on page 7. Oh, 74.
So the recommendation is for the solid concrete boundary fencing to be installed along the entire southern boundary of the site, and the inclusion of a planning condition requiring the installation and ongoing maintenance of the fence in a good solid state to be included.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Right. I've moved the resolution with the advisory condition I've just outlined to members.
Chair, we haven't gone to debate yet. I do apologise.
Oh.
We haven't gone to debate yet, have we?
Sorry about that. Need to get around for my tea. Sorry. Well, that's what we're debating then. Stephen, or anybody, please. Anybody wish to comment? Councillor Craddock.
Well, since I interrupted, I better. I'm happy if you're going to move the acceptance, but I do think we need to condition this liaison committee, and also perhaps ask them to include the local councillors in any liaison committee, so that they've got a bridge between the residents and the environmental health department as well.
Okay. Agree with that. The local councillors, of course, could be included in the liaison committee. Alison.
Just a reminder that it won't be a condition, it'll be an
It'll be
advisory.
an advisory, yeah. I was about to pick that up. And they're all looking after me tonight, aren't they? Because I was ill last time, you see. Okay, so I've moved it. I need a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Craddock, that it be delegated to the officers in accordance with the supplementary paper, with an advisory to be added that we request the company to set up a liaison committee with a group of residents, and they report on a twice yearly basis to environmental health with any concerns or issues that are raised. Happy with that? Take a vote on that. All those in favour, please. Anybody against? No. Sorry, it was unanimous anyway, Nicola. So nothing against. That's carried. Nicola?
Yep. Committee have resolved to delegate to the Head of Planning and Building Control to grant planning permission subject to conditions and subject to secure any necessary implementation and monitoring of a travel plan by way of a Section 106 agreement or planning condition as appropriate, and subject to the amendment and finalising of conditions, no further comments from a statutory consultee raising material planning considerations not previously addressed, and the overcoming of outstanding objections raised by the Public Lighting Officer and environmental protection. And then we've also added in an advisory that the company are requested to set up a liaison group with residents and councillors to have twice yearly meetings to address any issues with the site. Thank you very much.
And the minutes of those meetings reported to our environmental officers.
Indeed, yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Guttridge. Right, we move on then to item 4, which is the West Midlands Cop Shop at Brown Hills. We have one speaker in support, Mr. John Robson, who is a virtual speaker who is in the room. And we also have a gentleman, Darren Golding, who is the gentleman just walked in, who will be speaking against the application. I think you've got the talking stick, Michael. Okay, we have a presentation then, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to the land off Chester Road North and the former police station, Brown Hills Police Station it's known as. The proposal is for the erection of a freestanding single-storey restaurant with drive-through facility, car parking, landscaping and associated works, including custom order displays. The operator would be McDonald's. You see the plan shows the nearest centre just to the south east of the site, shaded blue, so it is in close proximity to a centre. There are some residential properties located around the site boundary, as well, as you can see there, along with a couple of other commercial uses, as you'll see as we go through the photos along Chester Road North. So an aerial photograph does show there are some trees on site. I'll talk about those in a bit more detail as we go through the proposals. So the proposed layout is on the screen before you, so you can see the main restaurant building would be located to the northmost boundary, and the in-out operation Chester Road. This is the proposed floor plan, proposed elevations, so very much what you expect to see from the McDonald's chain. Some details of the boundary treatment, which again I'll come back to in a bit more detail as we go through the rest of the presentation. So that's the existing elevation of the former station. Wider view of that same building. View along Chester Road North. The existing service road, more of that service road. That's the adjacent house, number 25. Longer view seeing number 25 in the distance. Residential properties on Parade View in fairly close proximity. And there's some views of the existing rear of the site. These photos are taken from the rear of number 51 Bradford Road, and they show the existing line of vegetation along the shared site boundary, and another view of the same. So going back through some of the detail of the proposal. It would be a single-storey contemporary design as per the corporate brand. They have requested 24/7 hour operations. There would be 90 covers, and there would be 3 deliveries per week. Acoustic fencing of 3.2 metres high along some of the garden boundaries on Chester Road North, and there are some other fences proposed, and I'll go through some of the details of that in just a second. The police station itself closed back in 2014, and as the first plan showed, it's in quite close proximity to the Brown Hills Centre, which is 300 metres to the north. Sorry, the site's to 300 metres to the north of the centre. So the sequential test has been provided. It addresses the council's policy, and 65 jobs would be created from the proposal. There are no likely effects on the adjacent SSI, and there's been no objection from Natural England. It's considered there'd be no impact on neighbours. The proposed building itself would be 11.7 metres high, and there are acoustic fences to protect neighbours. There is a question in the report for members to consider on fencing. There is a proposal as to whether a 3.2 metre acoustic fence should be provided to a section of the site boundary. However, the evidence that's been submitted suggests that the acoustic benefits of a 3.2 metre fence over and above the remaining 2.4 metres that's proposed elsewhere is a very minimal benefit, and actually from a human perspective, any benefits wouldn't be perceivable, is what we've been advised from our specialists. So the question to members is whether a 3.2 metre acoustic fence over and above a 2.4 metre outweighs the harm that would arise to the character of the area, because such a high fence would be visible from the main road, and we don't consider that's necessarily appropriate given the evidence we have before us. Just a question to consider as we go through. A condition is proposed to restrict the operating hours from 6 AM to 11 PM at night to try and minimise any additional impacts to nearby occupiers, and the extraction removed odour proposal is satisfactory from our environmental health colleagues. The evidence submitted also shows that there would be no excessive noise levels causing undue harm over and above the existing situation. The managers on site would deal with the litter, antisocial behaviour, so that would be managed effectively. There would be a loss of 8 trees. One of those needs to be felled regardless because of its poor condition, and 2 hedges at the rear, and that's shown on some of the photographs you saw referred to as conifers. And those are needed to be removed to accommodate the car parking spaces, which you can see on the plan. These trees aren't protected. There's only 2 Class B trees of reasonable arboricultural value, according to our council's tree officer, and those are to be secured for replacement planting by way of conditions. Neighbours' amenity is considered would be safeguarded by all the above mitigation measures, including the acoustic fence in whatever guise that ends up being, and by way of the conditions, including those to restrict operational hours. Just to note, members, the report does reference a tree that was in third-party ownership. The council's tree officer made a site visit yesterday. Wasn't planned just because he was in the area, but noticed that that tree has already been removed. So any reference to that tree in the report just needs to be updated to the fact that that has been removed. I've been advised that tree was not protected and was not necessarily a good specimen in any case. There's no action that we need to take as a local planning authority on that matter. So it's just by way of an update to members. An informative would be added in terms of the high risk coal and asbestos survey. The local highways authority have raised no objection, but they have said that the application does require delicate judgment, particularly on 3 matters, which I'll run through now for you. So the potential conflicts between traffic using the parallel service road and the multiple access points, the proposed on-site delivery arrangements and access management for delivery vehicles, and for safe pedestrian access. However, overall, those would not result in unacceptable impacts, and conditions proposed to manage and mitigate that, including a delivery management plan and highway improvement measures, are considered would be satisfactory to deal with some of those issues. In terms of representations received, we've had 293 letters of support for this proposal, and that's in relation to creation of jobs, bringing back a redundant site into use, the McDonald's franchise supporting local communities, and it would encourage visitors to Brown Hills. We've also received 40 objections from surrounding residential occupiers, and that relates to litter, increased traffic, noise, odour, air pollution, and would prefer the the site to come forward about housing and antisocial behaviour. So we've dealt with all of those points in the report. Of course, with the reference to housing, we have to, as a local planning authority, consider and determine the application that's before us, which is what we've done, and considered this application on its merits. In terms of consultees, no objections subject to safeguarding conditions, and I've talked about the tree officer having no objections subject to seeking replacement planting. So in terms of the supplementary paper, there's a few matters. There's some updated conditions that can be dealt with under the current officer recommendation if members are minded to support that. The tree officer, no objection, which I've mentioned just now, and the third party tree, which I've given you a further update on just now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Golding, I understand you're speaking in opposition to the application. You have 2 minutes, sir. I will start my clock when you start speaking.
Good evening. I have a brick-built dwelling at the top of my garden that I use for relaxation and reading, etc. But I will not be able to use it because the plans clearly show the location of the drive-through cars will be less than 10 feet from where I will be sitting. The noise from exhaust, loud music from adolescents' vehicles, stereo, smell from, and also the vibration from the vehicles through my building will be unbearable, making it impossible to relax. Also, the felling of trees will reduce the security to the rear of my property, and obviously it will be vulnerable. One of my neighbours managed to get through to a representative of McDonald's called Mr. Philip Isherwood, and when questioned about these acoustic reports and bits and pieces, he said, well, they're all estimates anyway. I've posted many comments on the planning website, and I've even emailed my councillors, only to be told they could not get involved. I feel this is unfair, and I would like to point out that many of the properties adjacent to McDonald's are privately owned. This means the people there have put down the roots, like myself, will have. I feel if McDonald's is allowed to continue, it will have an adverse effect on my life.
Okay. I have a virtual speaker in support of the application, which I understand Mr. Hobson, yes? You're in the room. You have the same 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening and thanks, Chair. My name is John Robson. I lead acquisitions in the north of the UK and the Republic of Ireland for McDonald's, and I'm ultimately responsible for this development. Having worked closely with officers throughout the application process, we are pleased with the recommendation to approve, and we're also very pleased with almost 300 letters of support from local residents We recognise the positive contribution that the new restaurant will make to the town's economy by regenerating this brownfield site. We've worked hard with your planning and highways officers during the course of the application to ensure the proposal before you is acceptable. As a result, no objections have been raised from statutory consultees. Our transportation experts have also undertaken extensive work to ensure that the layout design is acceptable in terms of parking provision and drive-through queuing capacity. Transport assessment provided demonstrates that the proposed traffic can be accommodated on the road network without any significant impact. This has been agreed again by your local highway authority. I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate McDonald's commitment to invest in the local area for the long term, creating at least 65 local jobs, probably more like 100 jobs in reality, but we don't want to overpromise. As a company, we invest over £43 million a year in staff training. All employees have access to a range of qualifications to help them develop, including national recognised foundation degrees and apprenticeships. In the UK, McDonald's has made a commitment for all new freehold restaurants to be net zero carbon by 2030. For 10 years, McDonald's has already has delivery lorries using 100% powered by biodiesel, with 40% of this is coming from used cooking oil in our restaurants. We buy 100% renewable electricity and have invested in long-term partnership agreements to develop renewable energy infrastructure. There are many benefits that the proposed scheme will bring, and we are excited to invest further in Walsall. Nevertheless, we have offered to reduce our opening hours and add additional mitigation measures to try and allay the concerns from a small number of local households. We will continue to work with them and be a good neighbour throughout the construction and operation of the restaurants. I trust you can support your officer's recommendation this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Right. Any questions to the speakers, please? Mr. Craddock.
Thank you, Chair. The question to Mr. Robson. First, at the rear of the premises, there's a substantial conifer hedge, which was included in the presentation, which provides a visual and acoustic barrier for the residents in Bradford Road in particular. I've seen the plan, and I was wondering whether it would be possible to accommodate retaining that hedge as part of the development.
Thank you. We try to retain trees as much as possible, but the issue we have is the tree. What you can see above ground is obviously just what is above ground, and below ground, the roots of the trees obviously extend a lot further into the site. So it's virtually impossible for us to retain those trees. Hence the reason why we've introduced mitigation in the form of the acoustic fence at 3.2 and I think 2.4 metres at various sections along the boundary. Case officer obviously explained that there is some movement as to increasing the fence to 3.6 or 3.4 if needs be, and we're happy to do whatever members think is the right thing. But the actual acoustic fence provides both visual and acoustic barriers to the residents in replacement of the conifers.
Sorry, you can't speak anymore, I'm afraid.
I'm going to ask that gentleman the question. You can ask him the question. Why am I tuning here? It's the hedge, which you've heard from the agent is a potential problem in retaining that. As a resident in that area, and I took the photograph from the rear of 51, which was included in the presentation. There's a debate there and a decision which we have to make. If this planning application is approved, do you think a 2.4 or a 3.2 metre fence, acoustic barrier, would be better? And I'd welcome your view on that.
Yeah, my concern about the trees, once the trees have gone, obviously from my property, from the rear elevation, all I'm going to see is McDonald's signs and the golden arches or whatever you call them and all that stuff. And it's something I want to see from my garden particularly. So if the fence could be 3.2 metres, that would obviously help. So that answers your question.
Okay. My question is, I go back to the days when we used to have police 24 hours a day. And obviously when this was a police station and we did have those police 24 hours a day, How did that affect your amenity in the brick building you referred to?
Most of the time, we didn't really hear anything coming from the police station at all. Occasionally, late at night, they would test the sirens, so you get a bit of a blast. Of
They test them a lot in Walsall Town Centre as well, yeah.
The two-tone, there were two-tone sirens then.
Used to be a pop group there.
Yeah, but other than that, we didn't really have any problems.
And that was a long time to remember when we had 24-hour police stations. Any questions, further questions for Councillor Waters?
To the applicant, how many cars do you calculate will actually be going through the drive-through 24 hours a day, and particularly at rush hour?
In the committee report, there's a transport assessment. Peak times, which is only, I'm talking just 1 hour on a Saturday afternoon. We're probably looking at, I don't know the exact details, but we're talking probably about 130, 140 in an hour. But that is literally for the peak hour on a Saturday afternoon. After that, it's significantly less.
Can I just have the block plan on the screen showing the proposed traffic movement for the drive-through, Mike? Thank you. And how many cars are indicated on there? I suppose we could count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 12 cars or 14 cars. My question, Mr. Robson, is this. My experience of trying to pass the one at Rushaw and trying to pass the one at Ventura Park in Tamworth is when that car park is full, they tail back onto the main road. What contingency is the proposal for cars that will try to enter the site when it's blocked with cars in that scenario we see on the screen?
Sorry, Chairman, just to go back to this previous question, it's 127 peak for that 1 hour, not 140. With regards to the stacking, this obviously all our new restaurants, and it's something we take very seriously, obviously for being a good neighbour, but also to ensure that the operation of our restaurants is as smooth as possible. We have stacking here for probably about, I think it's about 13 or 14 cars. We've done analysis with our traffic highways engineers, which estimates that even at that peak hour on a Saturday, there will be capacity for about an extra 1 or 2 cars on that stack before there's anything queuing on, even into the car park, not just into the highway. So we've designed it in a way that will ensure that there won't be any stacking onto the highway, and there probably won't be even any overspill into our car park from the drive-through lane access. And that's been agreed with the local highways officers.
Okay,
Chair.
I shall ask that question to
I
the
can
highways officer.
Can I ask that? Can I answer that question? Because there's a service road immediately in front of the premises, which is away.
I was
from the
hoping you were
highway.
going to say that, but
Yeah.
you didn't. I'm grateful for your local knowledge. I remember reporting the car wash that was there during the pandemic, and you're right, they were stacked up in that service road. It's just that my comments are made because when you go to the one at Rushaw, which we didn't have to have planning permission for because it was formerly a pub, it's a bloody nightmare. That's a technical term from planning.
And I confirm with that, Chair, I want to go to Shepwell Green in Willinghall and see that.
I've been there. Yeah, right. Okay, any further questions to the applicant or the objector, please? No. Questions to our officers then, please. Councillor Craddock,
Yes,
your
Chair,
patch.
on page 141, I just pointed this out to Mike. Condition 3, it says in the report that it's conditioning the hours from 8 AM till 2300 hours. And obviously that needs to confirm that's an error.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Apologies, that's a typo. So the report sets out the operating hours that we're proposing to condition would be from 6 AM to 11 PM, 7 days a week, and we'll update that condition.
It may be that, I know Mr. Guthrie, sorry, Mr. Golding can't speak, but just for clarity, the hours now being proposed by our officers is 6 in the morning until maximum 11 at night, as opposed to a 24-hour operation.
Yes.
Okay.
And there was another question, Chair, about the pollutants, particularly if you look where this gentleman lives in Bradford Road, and the cars are literally 5 or 6 foot from the end of his garden in the queue going round for the drive-through. I'm a bit surprised in terms of the highway officer. There hasn't been more objections. Those queues will be sitting there with the engines running pretty well all day from 6 o'clock in the morning till almost midnight. And just going to be sitting there idling as they slowly go round to the counter. And to suggest there's going to be no pollution from any of those cars, I just can't believe it.
Perhaps they're all going to be electric cars. I doubt it. We'll come to that. We'll ask that question in a minute. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll refer to the 293 letters of support, which I think must be a record. You're going to tell me it's not. But if it's not a record, it's not.
I did ask that question, John, and the answer is McDonald's, or the franchisee, conducted if you like, an open house, and as we do sometimes, as we've done with the waste transfer station in Aldridge, and there were a presentation and layouts and everything else, and people went along to express their view. So obviously 333 people attended in some form or another, 293 for and 40 odd against. So that's how it came about. But I asked that very same question at the pre-brief.
I was wondering if someone was on commission.
Yeah.
But anyway, referring to those 293, could you tell me and the meeting how many of those were from residents in the vicinity of that site? So I'm thinking of Chester Road, and is it Bradford Road at the back?
Bradford Road, yeah.
Gentleman lives. So how many actually came from those residents, which really, to me, are the only ones that would matter?
I think a general overview on that, Mike, would give us a help.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's helpful. I haven't got the specifics. The report talks about the letters coming from residents of Brown Hills, take them up what you will, and the wider Walsall Borough. 11 with no addresses given, but I don't have the specifics, unfortunately, without getting into the database, which we can't get into at the moment, neither of us. So
and likewise, the objectors?
Objections from 13 local residents, including those who boarded the
Answers
site.
your question, John? Councillor Samra?
Oh, we're in debate now, Chair, are we?
No. Any other questions to officers? My question is to our environmental health officer, if we have one. I don't know who's doing that. I'm just having Ian Rathbone. Ian, you've heard a comment about pollution control here. Perhaps you could address Councillor Craddock's concern that these cars in the drive-through will be sitting there taking their order through the screen, as my granddaughter tells me what she wants. What's your view on the potential pollution to the gentleman, in actual fact, who's the objector?
Well, the limited number of cars that are actually going through the drive-through would not affect the air quality objectives which are being achieved at the current moment.
Okay. And my question to my erstwhile officer, Catherine Morton, who I tried to take off at the knees at the last meeting, inadvertently I would add, and I've made an apology to her since, but I'll make a public one now. Catherine, I'm just concerned about, as Councillor Craddock said, there is a service road there, but my experience of passing and visiting McDonald's on an infrequent basis, I would add, that cars tend to stack out into the main highway. Do we have contingencies in place to make sure that it doesn't happen?
So, as I understand it, the officers looking at this application have had some lengthy conversations with McDonald's looking at the potential for vehicle stacking. As the gentleman speaking in support has mentioned, the modelling based on the number of trips expected, it's not foreseen to be a significant problem or sufficiently significant to warrant us objecting to the application. But one of the conditions we have included is around some junction improvements to address any potential for vehicle pedestrian conflicts on that service road and out onto the main road. So that's something that's been picked up as part of the conditions. But the extent of the impact on the main network isn't considered to be sufficient for highways to raise an objection.
Okay, any other questions to the officer? Councillor Craddock.
Sorry, Chair. The other one was the residents have expressed concern about vermin, rats, whatever, accumulated with waste food. I noticed there's a contaminated waste condition in the thing. Do you think that is strong enough to avoid any potential for rats and other vermin to build up in that area?
I think that's one for you, Ian, probably.
Sorry, Chair, I missed that.
I said, I think that might be a question to you. Do you believe that the arrangements for containing waste material to avoid vermin is adequate?
I believe so. If we do receive complaints, Environmental Health will action any complaints of that nature.
Okay. Councillor Bott?
Yes, Chair. On the tree issues, Chair, mentioned removal of 7 trees, the 2 edges. Now, it's been said that the edges were conifer trees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that classed as a tree?
It depends how big it is.
Yeah.
It starts as a hedge, but it becomes a bloody nuisance when it becomes a tree.
How many conifers are in the edge? Does that mean that these conifers will be removed as trees and the 7 more trees that's going to be removed?
Yeah.
Right. And will these be removed and planted off-site?
No.
Could that be a condition that we ask McDonald's to plant 7 trees off-site?
Alison?
We can't insist on that because the report explains that they're not worthy of retention and there's other measures to safeguard the neighbours. But if there was, we can't condition for planting off-site.
We could request.
It would have to be a Section 106 agreement. Because, yeah.
Christ, I tell you what, you've got more chance of getting a McDonald's than you got to get a 106 sign.
Through you, Chair, can we ask McDonald's if they'll plant off-site?
It'll be a franchisee. We can request that. But of course, if they say no, we are where we are. Right, questions over then. Oh, sorry, got one more.
We're in debate, only if we're in debate, Chair.
Yeah, we're in debate now.
Chair, McDonald's is a global brand. I mean, and look, I've got a confession here. I'm a frequent user and some of my kids love it. The one you referred to in Russell, the way that's designed, it's a very poor design. Because when you exit, you exit onto Bosty Lane. Absolutely. Hence why you have the problems. But most of them are well designed. I mean, we've heard from Councillor Crown about Birmingham. I mean, look, as I said, they're very good neighbours. I mean, this will only benefit the area. Bringing an old site back into use, it's going to employ. We've heard from, and I'm sure the objector here, they will respect his wishes and work well. Chair, I will be supporting this, and I'm sure others will hopefully also do that.
I think from the mood of the committee, which I can normally feel, I think there is genuine support for it, but we have to do our utmost to try and protect the neighbours who are going to be affected. Taking down the conifer hedge, matter of fact, if it was next to me, I'd probably say thank God for that, because they can be a nightmare. But I think Steve Craddock, who represents the area, of course, he would like to see the fence by Mr. Golding's house to be 3.2 metres.
Chair, if I can come in there, that's exactly what I was going to suggest.
I read your mind.
There is, from local residents, and I've heard this from not just this report, but from many people who I've spoken to, is there is a lot of support for the proposal. And I am going to support the proposal. I am concerned for the neighbours, particularly on Bradford Road, their visual and audible situation will deteriorate with this development. We've heard from the speaker here that actually I would like a 3.2 metre fence erected on that boundary to more from a visual than an acoustic. We've heard that it would actually make very little difference, but you know, just across the fence, you're going to be hearing, I'd like a Big Mac and fries every 2 seconds as people are ordering it through the speakerphone. So anything that can be done to reduce that, and it's all day, every day. And I do feel a great deal of sympathy for the resident and the other ones who live on Bradford Road. But I'd like to move that we accept that, subject to the hours of 6 AM till 2300 in item 3 being corrected. A 3.2 metre hedge barrier fence, acoustic barrier being put up on the boundary with Bradford Road residents.
Councillor Bott.
When you said an acoustic barrier.
Yeah. Alison.
I was just going to say, I think Mike mentioned earlier that we were seeking what committee members thought about whether it could be a 2.4 metre fence along the frontage on the Chester Road North rather than the 3.2 because it's not actually required along that position.
I've
You know
heard
better than anybody.
no criticism of that particular one, the 2.4. Well, I think on the front would be all right, but it's 3.2.
3.2 there. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make the point that the absence of supplementary planning guidance, of course, doesn't contain a health assessment for this particular site. You know, one always has concerns about the operation of takeaway food outlets. Not sort of against it, but I think an assessment of what's going on round and about, as happens in many other boroughs, would be a helpful addition.
I hear what you say, but I think anybody's eating habits is their personal choice. And I think any legislation to limit that, I would oppose. But I take on board what you say. I have it, oh, you know, I don't know, you're moving it, Steve. You're moving it, I'm seconding it with the condition that the hours of operation are 6 till 11. Well, yeah, it's all right.
I still have my concerns regarding the amount of cars, because there's an island there, and I've still got concerns regarding that. And as you stated, Rush Hall is my ward, and the amount of cars that actually stack up, waited to go into McDonald's. But that's
The good
just
news
me.
is that certain traffic powers will go from the police to this authority going forward, so there will be a way of raising income by nicking the people who are going past into the stacking system and clogging up the highway. So I look forward to that, to do with the money. Having said that, it's moved by Councillor Craddock. I'll second it, subject to those two amendments. That is to say, the fence is 3.2, where the residents are, 2.4 on the front, and that we request that the franchisee stroke McDonald's, whoever, be requested to plant or provide 7 trees off-site in a location to be agreed by our officers. Happy with that? Right, moved and seconded. All those in favour, please. Agreed. Anybody against? 2. Right. Nicola.
Thank you very much, Chair. Planning, just to repeat that, Planning Committee have resolved to delegate to the Head of Planning and Building Control to grant planning permission subject to conditions and subject to no new material considerations being received within the consultation period, and the amendment and finalising of conditions, and also for the addition of 2 further conditions, one relating to a 3.2 metre fence along the boundary, and that's to be an acoustic barrier, and also for the hours of operation to be changed from 6 a.m. in the morning until 11 p.m. at night. And then we are also to request from the franchisee or the applicant that 7 trees are planted off-site at a location to be agreed in the future. Thank you very much.
Glad you were listening. Moving on then, thank you, Mr. Golding. Item 5 is Rother, which is Highgate Drive. My colleague, Councillor Wahid Receivers, declared interest, as has anything for an early night.
Hiya, thank you, Chair. I'll be
Hey.
presenting this one, so I'll just get the
You got it
presentation up.
afterwards. All right. Okay. I have Mr. Kazur Khan, is that correct? Mr. Khan. We have a presentation first, and then you'll have your chance to make your speech.
Hi, Chair. Thank you. It's Leah Wright, Senior Planning Officer here at Walsall Council.
Right. Leah Wright, Planning Officer, fire away, slowly.
Thank you. Hi, so this site is 58 Highgate Road. Sorry, it's not that one. It's Rother. Let me start again. That's the next item, sorry. So this item is Rother on Highgate Drive. The reason it's being called into committee is by Councillor Hussain on the grounds that delicate judgment is required. As you can see on the screen, this constraints plan showing the application site in red. Here is an aerial plan of the site. As you can see, there's a large amount of trees and shrubbery around the site. The application site is located on Highgate Drive. It's a predominantly residential area. The application property is known as Rother. It's a detached house and it's generously set back from the road and benefits from a wide frontage.
Participant is now joining.
The site boundary is concealed by a large number of trees and shrubs, which, as you can see on the screen here. Other properties within the vicinity of the application site are of varying styles and set back from the road. The applicant site benefits from a off-street parking to the front and an open wide frontage, and the main dwelling is set back from the highway. It should be noted the site isn't within a conservation area and it's not a listed building. So this is the proposed block plan. So the new dwelling will be to the rear of the site. It's an L-shaped dwelling and it will be approximately 123 square metres. In relation to the main dwelling, rather, the proposed building is sited at the rear, and the separation distance between the dwelling is approximately 5.18 metres. It should be noted there's a live application which is also on this agenda at 58 Highgate Road, which is adjacent to the site. Here is some elevations of the site. As you can see, it's a pitch roof design and there's various openings, bifold doors, and in terms of the internal accommodation, there will be a bedroom at ground floor, kitchen, living, dining room, bathroom, an ensuite and bedroom, two bedrooms, sorry, at first floor. So, sorry, moving on. This will be the retaining wall that is proposed. So this is rather the existing dwelling and this is the proposed new structure. It is the tree protection plan which was submitted with the application. Here are some images of the dwelling. Sorry, this is 58 Highgate Road. Then this is the north of Highgate Road, the southeast of Highgate Road, a few of the houses on the south of Highgate Road. This is the dwelling itself, so it's rather. This is a closer image of the existing dwelling, a view of the side elevation, a view of the rear elevation of rather a bit closer view, and then this is where the proposed dwelling will be, and this will be where the retaining wall is also proposed. So it's noted there was no neighbour representations received. We had an objection from trees. So whilst the principle of the new wall inside the boundary is acceptable, there's been concern raised regarding damage to the roots of adjacent trees and the site access. In terms of the principle of development, so the proposal would add to the supply of housing, so it could be potentially supported by paragraph 60 of the NPPF. However, this would be subject to detailed consideration on local character, trees as mentioned previously, and the amenity of neighbouring properties. It should be noted the original description of development was for a family annex, and that was considered to introduce a significant build. The applicants did revise the description for a 3-bedroom detached dwelling. Whilst it is noted the applicants suggest their parents and relatives reside in it in the first instance, that situation may change in the future. If the application was deemed to be acceptable, a condition would be recommended that the dwelling was to be an annex. It should also be noted that the LPA have tried to work with the applicant, and there has been opportunities given to reduce the size of the annex and also to extend the main dwelling as opposed to having a separate unit. As such, the description was changed and we have assessed it as a new dwelling. In terms of the design and appearance, the building will be apparent from the streetscape. And as you can see in the photograph, there is a large amount of trees, but it hasn't been confirmed that these could be retained. So the dwelling will be prominent. We would say that the dwelling will appear cramped and contrived in nature, and it is also a form of backland development, which would be unacceptable and not characteristic of the area. In terms of impact on neighbouring properties, the proposed dwelling does have a close relationship with number 58 and residential apartments situated to the north of the site. There is a slight drop in land levels, as I've previously mentioned, but it would still be visible from these dwellings. There is a bedroom, a window serving the bedroom, which will be obscure glazed, which could mitigate some of this harm, which would be a a condition on any approval. In terms of the design in Warsaw SPD, there are separation distances that we would have to abide by, but as there were no windows at first floor, these distances wouldn't apply in this instance. In terms of amenity of future occupiers, the shared space, if I could show you the photograph as above. So here you can see the garden. You can see that this will be shared space. So the dwelling will be here and the existing dwelling is here. That will be 195 square metres. And whilst that might be acceptable, it isn't actually going to be private amenity space. So it'd be considered unacceptable in this instance. In terms of the bedrooms, they do meet the national space standards. Bedroom 1 does have quite a large window, and whilst it is single aspect, it would allow for an adequate amount of light. However, bedrooms 2 and 3 aren't going to be served by a window and instead are going to be served by a roof light, and this wouldn't be considered to be acceptable for a standalone dwelling. There wouldn't allow for natural daylight, and there would be no outlook from these windows. In terms of highways, the development is considered acceptable, and this was subject to all parking areas being implemented and retained, and the new dwelling being conditioned as an annex and no additional vehicular accesses being created. As previously mentioned, there was an objection from trees. There is concern regarding the adjacent trees and banking. The tree assessment states that the existing unauthorised block work will be demolished and rebuilt, as you can see on this photograph. This may have implications to the damage of the roots of the adjacent trees and was a concern raised in correspondence throughout this application. No clarification has been given at this time, so an objection still stands. In terms of if the application was to be considered acceptable by committee, conditions would be recommended to meet the requirements of the Black Country Air Quality SPD for electric charging points and low NOx boilers. In conclusion then, although an amended description has been provided, the development has been assessed as a detached dwelling and it fails to comply with the adopted planning policies and would be detrimental to the living conditions of the nearby occupiers and has the potential to be detrimental to the adjacent trees and banking. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Before we start, can I just clarify a point for my members? You made the point that this has been a separate dwelling. Can I just get you to confirm that this was originally an annex and it was our request, I would say our, not your, but a request was made that this should be a separate dwelling and not an annex?
Yes, it was requested that it would be a separate dwelling.
Important that my members know that. The request for a separate dwelling rather than an annex was made by us, not by the applicant. Okay, I'll put that on the table. Right, Mr. Khan, you have 2 minutes, sir, and I shall be timing you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee, for giving me the opportunity to speak. As mentioned by Leah, we initially requested for this planning application to be an annex. Upon the advice of the then planner and the manager, we had to change it to a new dwelling. Essentially, as you're aware, this application is for my parents who are elderly. They're about 70 years old. My mother has schizophrenia. She's recently diagnosed with COPD and angina. My father has a chronic kidney disease, and he's at stage sort of his kidneys are functioning at 18%. So currently, where they are residing, the living arrangements are not suitable. Firstly, because my younger brother, he has 2 children under the age of 10. And as a result of them sort of going to school, coming back, there's a lot of, they're exposed to a lot of germs, and which has further sort of deteriorated their health as a result of that. And in the planning refusal, it stated that, you know, why haven't I extended my house? The reason is that my parents require that separation because I work in the fostering realm. My wife's a secondary teacher at Queen Mary's. I have 2 sons who are at school, and they need that distance where they are not exposed to any germs and any issues which would be critical for their health. Also, I'd just like to add that I'm not a property developer. It's not for my personal use. I don't want to make money out of it. It's solely for my parents. I've lived there since 1999, and it was my parents' house, and they gave me the house. And I want to just sort of pay them back and look after them under my sort of observation, so where they feel comfortable. The reason why we have 3 bedrooms is my parents, my mother's got schizophrenia, she doesn't sleep. My father needs his own space, mum needs her own bedroom, and one will be for a carer, for one of the siblings to stay with them to care for them. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Any questions to the speaker, please? Councillor Nawaz.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Khan. One of the issues, because this, as many may remember, was came in front of us some months ago, reported. And one of the issues was the tree officer and the impact on the trees. Can you tell us what you're proposing to do in order to protect the trees?
So,
the left-hand side of the development.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, we've done back and forth design as well as the tree situation and the wall. So, I mean, as Leah mentioned, that we are proposing to knock the wall down, to knock the existing. We've actually said that we will leave a meter and backfill with soil, so it doesn't affect the roots. So there's no issue. The tree. This was put in a further report that I had sort of made, which was submitted. So I don't know what's happened with that. And we had an amended engineering report which I had done independently, which says that we'll have a gap between the neighbour's wall and our wall and backfill that, so it doesn't damage the trees and. So,
okay.
Sure, what's happening.
Thank you. And then can you just confirm that this property is to be used as, in all purposes, as an annex to support your parents, and not as a independent thing? And in regards to the drive, it will be a mutual drive, and the amenity space will be used.
It will be solely for the use of my family and my parents, and going forward, my wife will be the annex, and my son probably the house.
Mr. Khan, I'm just going to call Councillor Samra, but much as I disagree with it in the current circumstances of the world, and certainly the pandemic, we can't or shouldn't take into account personal circumstances with health. I think that will change in coming years for 2 reasons. One is that very commendable what you're looking to do to look after your parents, especially when they get to 70. I'm 73 soon. My daughter will probably wing me off somewhere, but there we are. But I think that the pandemic has changed people's way of thinking, and I'm looking at a way, and I'm looking to my officers, but I will be taking this up with the Secretary of State as to whether we should take this as a planning consideration, because we've got strains on social services, and of course, very much the situation that you have. I put that on the table for what it is, but I have to say, at this point in time, we can't use that as a material planning consideration. Councillor Samuel.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Khan, one of the objections from our planners is that there would be insufficient level of private rear garden. Am I right in thinking that this is going to stay open? There will be no boundary treatment at all, so you will share any existing gardens and land that you've got between this new dwelling?
Absolutely, it'll be one entity. My house and the annex at the back will be one. However, at all times it will be used by family members, either me or my parents, or children and myself.
So, good Chair, another objection from the planners, which I thought was quite strange, was they were worried about your security, your own property security, if this dwelling were to be approved. I don't know whether planners were coming with that, but it's number 2 on the objections. I quote, in addition, this form of inappropriate standard development reduces the level of safety and security for the occupiers of River and the future occupiers of the new dwelling, plus adjacent neighbours. I mean, if this committee were minded to approve it, would you feel that your security in any way would be impeded by this new dwelling?
Not at all. How? When it's a one entity and family with both house and
Councillor Wise.
Thank you, Chair. This is my ward, and I know the area very well. Can you, Mr. Khan, tell us in regards to the impact on surrounding properties? isn't this land much lower than the surrounding properties, and therefore the impact directly will be lessened?
Absolutely. I mean, I think on the report, some may say is that they will oversee into number 58, which is not the case because the
land is lower.
The land is 1.5 meters lower. Yeah, so I don't think it will oversee into. There's no windows.
Questions from members, please? Questions to our officers then, please. Councillor Sanders.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just on that point where we've cited that security, if this committee would minded to approve this application, that the applicant who's making the applicant, his security would be put in question. I don't know, Chair, first time I've ever seen this in a report, why we've sort of cited that. Maybe the officer could shed some light on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the issue here is because it's being considered as a separate dwelling as opposed to an annex. Although it's stated at the moment that it's going to be occupied by members of the family, we can't secure that in future that the occupiers will still be these family members and the occupiers of Rother. So as we've assessed it as a separate dwelling, these are the issues that have arose in regard to privacy and security.
But I come back to the point, Leah, that it was us, the planning office, not you, I know who it was, who asked this to be a separate dwelling. We could, of course, condition this to say it could only ever be used in conjunction with the main residence. That's not uncommon. But, I just make the point to members that the applicant needs to be exonerated, if that's the word. They did want an annex, but it was us that said you should have a separate dwelling.
Thank you, Chair. Leah, I don't think you've answered that security question sufficiently, but however, I'll move on. We've also, one of the objections, point 4, is that the existing dwelling Rother would have an insufficient level of private rear garden amenity space, which would fail to reflect the size of gardens in the locality. Now, looking at the map that you provided here, there's a recent development that took place across the road at the old Hawthorns. Some of those properties are ones that face on Highgate Road. Those gardens are very, very small. And likewise, where there's other developments took place. So for us to say that this particular development, and we've heard obviously from the applicant here that they would use the whole site, there's no boundary treatment that would take place, reflect other size of gardens. Could you please shed some light on where our thinking is with that, please?
Yeah, again, I'll come back on that point, that as it has been assessed as a separate dwelling, we have gone with the space standards that are recommended in the Design in Walsall SPD, which is 68 square metres of private amenity space and not shared space. I can understand what you're saying about, neighbouring properties maybe having smaller gardens, but along that stretch, these are reasonably sized plots with large gardens, and we wouldn't want to be seeing a worsening of a situation in regard to the private amenity space that Rother currently benefits from and any new dwelling.
I just take Councillor Bott, but before I do, I know a house on the Mellish Road that's got a back garden of 1.7 acres. Son of that father is here, and yet the house next door has got a smaller garden. So I think that's a bit of a red herring. I'm not having to go at Leah here. I think this is important to point out. Each amenity space is, in actual fact, is particular to that particular house, wherever that might be. Councillor Bott.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Have we got a tree officer on Teams?
I don't know. Got a tree officer on the call?
There isn't, unfortunately, today.
No.
But
Only working
planning officers might be able to answer the question.
Ask your question, Paul.
The question is, Chair, I want a response of a tree officer, what the applicant said about the trees and the roots, the wall itself.
Well, I'm aware of what the history of this site. I do know, and Mr. Khan will be quick to correct me if I mislead you, that the tree officer originally objected because of the proximity of the proposed dwelling to the existing trees. And as a result, Mr. Khan has moved it back at the request of the tree officer and has said that by having a metre gap between the wall and the proposed dwelling, he would backfill that to protect the roots of the tree. Is that about right? Yeah.
I accept that, Chair, but is our tree officer satisfied with that?
My understanding is yes.
Yes.
But unless somebody can tell me otherwise.
I think he is, yeah.
I think he is, or he is a different thing altogether.
Well,
I'm being told he is. There was a because of the difference
I can
in level.
advise you, Paul, that yes, he is. Yeah, people believe me. People believe me. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just draw committee's attention to, as Councillor Samra has, the recommendation for refusal, point 2, where we're quoting unacceptable level of noise and disturbance from the occupants of the annex, but we've received no representations from anybody. It seems a little bit like the nanny state. We're complaining on behalf of people who don't want to complain.
I think, and I'll keep making this point so you understand, the report is written as if this was a separate dwelling, and that's in defence of the planning officer that's here this evening. The applicant was asked to make that, and Leah has addressed it on that basis. I intend to move a resolution later in the agenda that this committee instruct our officers to write to the Secretary of State, and I'll speak to him, to see whether in actual fact, in the review of the planning process that's currently going through Parliament, that we actually ask for personal circumstances of this nature to be taken into account. Local authorities now are finding a pinch in their budget for social care, to the extent the government have actually said they will increase 1.2% of council tax to allow for, national insurance, to allow for social care. Now, here we have an operation where the gentleman, and he's not the only one, is looking to look after his elderly parents, which is common within the Sikh and the Muslim community. And I say that not being racist, you know me better than that. But unfortunately, in other indigenous communities, they say, oh, let's put them in a home. Well, you know, I think the planning regulations need to be changed. And I will ensure that that letter goes off, purely simply because it's, as you all know, it was me that changed the law on the fear of crime being a material planning consideration. And I think now's the time I had another go at something else, which I think is long overdue. But that's my view.
Can I just come back on that, Chair?
Yeah.
I agree with every point you've made there. The point I'm making is we are saying as an authority, we are protecting the neighbours from unacceptable levels of noise and disruption or disturbance from the property. But zero of the neighbours have actually made representation about it themselves. So we are creating a situation where we are complaining on behalf of people who haven't complained.
I take on board what you said. I think that, as I've said in defence of the planning officer presenting tonight, she was requested to address the report as if it was a separate dwelling. I'm not saying you should, but members could, should they wish to, in situations like this, could impose a condition that it always is ancillary to the main dwelling. So therefore that protects it being sold off as a separate dwelling, unless, of course, they appeal against that planning condition. Is that about right? Yeah. Right. Any other questions, please? No. Move to debate then. Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you, Chair. Taking on everything we've known about this application and the fact that Mr. Khan is there trying to do a good job in sort of having a development that will help him to look after his parents, and that use side, I understand, is not a planning consideration. He's come to this authority with a annexed building, a development. We've gone to him to say, right, whatever you've planned, make it a separate building, don't make it an annex. He's gone and done that, and now we're saying to him as an authority that the application is not acceptable because it's a separate building. I mean, it's quite, to some extent, quite bizarre in the way that's happened. And I know officers probably didn't do it in that way, but the result of it is we've got a gentleman who's worked with our officers and has created a building there, and is now being told that that isn't a good idea. The officers have put forward several reasons for objecting to this proposal and refusing it, and I'd like to go through them. The proposal that's been put forward to us today is at a much lower level than the surrounding buildings, and therefore the impact on the neighbours and the neighbouring buildings, in my view, is minimal. The amenity space, as we've heard from Mr. Khan, is going to be shared between the people who are living in the annex, and I'll call it an annex because that's what I think it is, and Mr. Khan's family, and therefore there isn't any issues in the amount of space that is available for them to use. There was an issue about lighting to the bedrooms 2 and 3. That, of course, the size of the windows of the roof lights can be changed if we so wish to ask the applicant to do that, to allow more light to come in, because it won't have an impact on the neighbouring buildings. So we can put a condition on that increases to allow more lighting. And that the applicant, in my view, from the last meeting we had when the tree officer spoke about the impact on the trees, has vastly improved the design in order to minimise the impact on the trees. And that should be commended, because when it's not often we have people come along and they create that space, a metre space backfilled to protect the roots, is something that I think is a positive for the application. So in my view, this is a good application, and committee should support it, and thus I move that we grant permission for this development with a condition.
I need to know the reasons why you are
Yeah,
turning over the.
I've explained them, but I'll go into them again.
We need to do that now, so we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. I'll
Okay, so the first reason is that the proposal will have a minimal impact on surrounding properties due to the height levels of the different pieces of land. The amenity space will be sufficient, as this is an ancillary building to the main building. The applicant has vastly improved from the original application, the setting out of the development, and therefore has minimised the impact on the local trees. Those 3 reasons, because they deal with the bulk
you
of
might wish to consider, which we debated, that the recommendation of this to be a separate dwelling was a recommendation or a request from our planning department.
Absolutely, because if you look at some of the reasons, they actually talk about it as an annex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the condition of.
Councillor Murray.
Sorry, I was just going to say with the condition that it remains ancillary to the main building.
I had that moved and seconded by Councillor Bott. Just, John, you had your light on for some time.
Yeah, similar to Councillor Nawaz, really. The virtually all of those reasons for refusal, and I've got great sympathy with the officer here, they're all based on the fact that it is a completely separate dwelling. And let's be honest, none of us are going to live forever. And if it was a separate dwelling, either or both of those properties could be sold off, will be sold off, I suppose, if it's a separate dwelling. And all those factors there for refusal would come into play then, because there would be 2 separate dwellings owned by separate families, whatever. However, if, as it's been suggested, I think by yourself, Chairman, that it was conditioned that it was an annex and they couldn't be sold off separately, then I would have no problem whatsoever in supporting this proposal. I think it's a good proposal. I agree with everything you say about what Mr. Khan's trying to do for his family. But if it remains as separate buildings, then I would have difficulty in supporting it.
I think the point is well made. Stay in or go in, Angela. I'm conscious of the fact of the health issues surrounding the Omicron variant, and I hope you're not spreading it around. Can I just say that I have great sympathy with Mr. Khan, but I'll call Alison first before I make my closing statement.
Councillor, thank you very much. I just wanted to clear up the issue about ancillary or separate dwelling. An ancillary building or an ancillary dwelling is something that is reliant on the main dwelling. It is an ancillary. So, for example, it might have a few rooms in it, a bedroom or a lounge, but it wouldn't necessarily have all the facilities that you'd expect in a main dwelling, like a kitchen, a bathroom, etc. And that is why we're calling this a separate dwelling, because this proposed building does have a kitchen, a bathroom, 3 bedrooms. It's all the accommodation that could be occupied independently. I know it isn't going to be, but it could be occupied independently. And that's just that distinction.
You're quite right, Alison, but if we put a condition on that this can only be used in conjunction with the main residence, then if sometime in the future, that has to be changed or wishes to be changed. It's a matter for this committee to reduce that under a Section 73 variation, to take that clause away. However, I have to say, and I speak on behalf of a resident of Aldridge who rang me, and John will know, or may know who I mean, but long-standing friend whose 93-year-old mother was being asked to pay £1,230 a week to go into a local residential. That is why I feel strong enough to write to Michael Gove, and I'll speak to him after, to say that the time has come when we should review these personal circumstances. So if committee are minded to support this application with the condition that this ancillary building should only be used as in conjunction with the main house, should not be sold up as a separate dwelling, then I'm happy to support that. I'll take, I had that moved and seconded. Are you happy with the moved and seconded to include that condition? See Mr. Khan's nodding, so I don't think he has a problem. Michael.
Chair, thank you. Just on planning conditions, just whether members want to consider the types of conditions that you may wish to include should you continue with a grant of planning permission for construction management plan, tree protection details, method of construction,
materials, hours of operation,
removal of permitted development rights potentially.
Yes, definitely. Remove what that means for the Mr. Khan, but you can't speak. When a dwelling is constructed, it does get what we call permitted development rights, so you can do certain things without planning permission. If PD rights are withdrawn, it means that any alteration, extension or whatever has to come back to this committee for an approval. So I know from what I've heard that the circumstances certainly dictate that may or may not happen. But we have also that materials, tiles, bricks be confirmed by our local authority. I have it moved and seconded then by Councillors Dr. Wales and Councillor Bott. Take a vote on that. All those in favour, please. What against? No, that's carried. In doing so, can I request that officers draft a letter for me to sign to Michael Gove, the Secretary of State, that covers planning and the levelling up department, whatever that is, to outline the fact that personal circumstances in the current climate of the pandemic, and indeed the rising costs of social care, that the planning conditions and the planning regulations be amended, that planning authorities can take that into account as a material planning consideration. You happy with that? Take a vote on that. That's a unanimous decision of this committee, which I like incorporated into the letter. So I can tell Michael that I think it's time for that to be readdressed. And as they're going through looking at the planning process, some of it's, especially with permitted development, which they now seem to have taken a stall on, thank goodness, I think it's time that we actually raise this issue. It is a national problem, not just local. It's a national issue of looking after our elderly parents. I suppose I should declare an interest in case my daughter's listening, but there we are. Okay.
Chair, can I just jump in there and read the decision, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please. I'm just going to call you, actually.
Sorry about that. Yes, so committee have resolved to go against the officer recommendation, which was to refuse planning permission, and instead they have resolved to grant planning permission for a number of reasons. One being that the proposal provides minimal impact on the surrounding properties due to the height levels. Two, the amenity space is considered to be sufficient as the proposal is considered to be ancillary to the main dwelling. Three, the proposal has been vastly improved and therefore is thought to have minimal impact on the trees. Four, it's regarded as a separate dwelling only because of the planning officer request for it to be so. And sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. Number five, sorry, that there will be a condition for the property to be regarded as ancillary to the original dwelling and that it's not to be separately sold in the future. in terms of conditions, there is to be conditions regarding a construction management plan, hours of construction, removal of PD rights, and also regarding materials, which to be agreed with the planning authority.
Thank you, Nicola. Well remembered. Thank you, Mr. Khan. That's agreed. And can I just say, from a personal point of view, you have my personal thanks for doing what you're doing, because I think more and more people should be taking that way forward. And that's why I've decided to write to the Secretary of State to make that a material planning consideration in the future. And if we get agreed, you can just say that you were here when history was made. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. We then move on to the next item, which is of a similar nature, I would add, and is next door. So we've rehearsed most of it. Yeah, if Councillor Sain's outside, you can come back in now. Just for the record, Kizza called it in when he wasn't a member of this committee, and he was right. It did require delicate judgment. Right. Yes, right, yeah. You have to help, you have to do that yourself. Councillor Lou. 58 Highgate then, Michael. Next door, by the way.
Thank you, Chair. Still with Leah, this one.
Yeah, hi.
Leah.
Hi, yeah, it's me again. Yeah, so this one is 58 Highgate Road. So the reason for it coming to committee is that it's a councillor application. So as you can see on the screen, this is a constraints map. The site is in the red line. It should be noted that there is the Hawthorns, a locally listed building opposite the site. Here is aerial image of the site. As you can see, there is a lot of shrubbery and trees. Again, here's the existing site plan. So you can see this is 58 Highgate Road, and we can see rather in conjunction with this. The application site is a spacious corner plot at the junction of Highgate Road and Highgate Drive. As you can see, it's a large detached dwelling, and it has previously been extended towards the centre of the plot. As I've mentioned previously, Rother sits to the south of the application site and has a lower ground level than the application site. Here's the proposed site plan. So they're proposing a dwelling, which will be a new 2-storey dwelling house adjacent to and within the rear garden. The application is to create a new separate planning unit, and the existing plot would be subdivided to provide an area measuring approximately 390 square metres. There'll also be associated private amenity areas and a new vehicle access and driveway from Highgate Drive, as can be seen here. The proposal aims to provide semi-independent supported living accommodation for a family member of the host dwelling for whole life occupancy. So as you can see here, these are the street elevations. So this is existing, this is 58 Highgate Road and Rother, and here will be the proposed elevations with the new 2-storey dwelling. Here are some proposed elevations of the dwelling. And here is going to be the internal arrangement. So we'll have bedroom, a living room, kitchen, WC, bathroom and dining room, and then a living room, garage and bathroom. And as you can see, this is the proposed roof plan with roof lights and then loft storage. Moving on to the photograph. So this is a view northwards along Highgate Road, and you can see this is the entrance to Rother here. This is the Hawthorns. This is 6 and 8 Highgate Drive, Rother, which is of course adjacent to the site. This is the habitable room windows in 58 Highgate Road, facing windows in 58 Highgate Road, and the view southwards along Highgate Drive. So in terms of the principle of development, the principle of the new dwelling house is considered acceptable. However, this will have to be subject to all other considerations. It should be noted the applicant has not demonstrated why the separate unit couldn't be attached to the original dwelling, and has not explained why it's going to be needed as a separate dwelling in the submitted planning statement. In terms of conservation, we have had an objection to the proposal, and it is considered that the proposal represents overdevelopment of the plot and fails to reflect the existing pattern of development along Highgate Drive, and would fail to reflect the architectural design features of the existing dwelling and existing dwellings along Highgate Drive. The Hawthorns opposite the application site is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset and is on the local list. The Conservation Officer has concern that the planning statement has made no reference to this locally listed building. And it's considered the proposal will be contrary to paragraph 203 of the MPPF, and that the level of harm to the significance, they would have a low level of harm to the significance of this non-designated heritage asset. In terms of the proposed scale of the new dwelling, its position forward of 58 Highgate Road and its location on higher ground next to Rother is considered to have an overly prominent and discordant appearance within the street scene and an overly overbearing impact on Rother, which is the bungalow, of course, next door. If Planning Committee were minded to approve the application, planning conditions would be required in respect of materials, floor levels, boundary treatments, including retaining walls, pedestrian visibility space, and impact on trees. In terms of the amenity space, the provision of usable private amenity space is 43 square metres to the rear of the new dwelling, and this is considered to be inadequate and fails to meet the recommended provision of 68 square metres as stated in the Designing Warsaw SPD. It should be noted the remaining private amenity space for 58 Highgate Road would be 296 square metres, which would exceed policy requirements. In terms of impact on residential amenity, there's limited separation distance of 16.5 metres between the first floor rear habitable room windows in the proposed new dwelling and habitable room windows in the single-storey rear extension to 58 Highgate Road, and this would be considered to be unacceptable and impact on the privacy of 58 Highgate Road. And whilst the house has been intended to be in the same family ownership, again, the ownership may change in the future, and it's considered that the overlooking and privacy impacts would be unacceptable and represents poor design. It's noted that if Planning Committee were minded to approve the planning application, planning conditions would be required in respect of permitted development removal for additional side-facing doors and windows, extensions including additional stories, and garden buildings, and this would be because of the limited available private amenity space and to retain the loft area for storage only. In terms of trees, the construction of the access drive is likely to have a significant amount of root material likely to be detrimental to the long-term health, condition and stability of the trees, with the potential for failure and damage to the persons of property. In this view, the Council's tree officer has objected to the proposal on the grounds that the proposal will have a detrimental impact on the health, condition and stability of the trees. It is noted there are significant ground level alterations between the site and Highgate Drive, and these details have not been provided, and this would be required to understand the scale of the works. In terms of highways, the Highway Authority have considered the development would have an unacceptable impact on road safety. This is because of the current lack of pedestrian visibility. However, subject to the submission of satisfactory amended access details, including a pedestrian visibility space, it considered that the proposal would not have severe cumulative impacts, and as such, if the committee were minded to approve it, this would be something that would need to be resolved. In terms of air quality, if Planning Committee were minded to approve the application, planning conditions in respect of the submission of a low emission scheme to include electric vehicle charging points, low NOx boilers and a constructive management plan would need to be included. Should be noted earlier in the report that no neighbour representations were received. In conclusion, we have recommended refusal, and this is on the basis that the scale, height, position and discordant design of the proposed new dwelling house is considered to be incongruous and detrimental addition to the existing street scene and would have a harmful impact on neighbours' residents' privacy and amenity. The proposal has failed to include details of the likely impacts on trees, land levels and a statement of heritage significance. We have noted that there are personal circumstances. However, this is a separate dwelling unit, as mentioned previously. There is insufficient information to fully assess the impacts, and therefore, as again, we are recommending refusal.
Okay, Well, I think it's virtually a rerun of the last application. I do know the personal circumstances of the individual who made the application. And I repeat what I've said on many occasions. Elected members should be treated no different to the member of the public. And I think just because you are an elected member, you shouldn't have anything either for or against you because of that title. It does annoy me at times, but there we are where we are. Right, we have the application before us. We haven't got any speakers. It's here because, oh, have we?
Leader,
Oh, is it?
got Mr. Cotton speaking this evening.
My apologies. I should have read the script. I feel like Mrs. Brown. Okay, Mr. Cotton then, I'm told. Is he with us?
Mr. Cotton is in the call. I can see him here. There we go. Mr. Cotton, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Right, Mr. Cotton, you have 2 minutes to address the committee, and I will be timing those 2 minutes.
Okay, good evening all and Happy New Year. I'm agent for this application. There's quite a long list of points which have just been read out. I'll try and counter a few of them. One, why was it a separate building? Due to the circumstances of the patient involved, which is Councillor Nazir's son, the facility becomes quite large. It requires 2 full-time carers at any time, plus a treatment area and a lift, and also a degree of independence. Hence, it was built as a separate facility. Hence, it's proposed as a separate facility rather than an annex. And also, the lifespans of parents and children must be taken into account. If one dies before the other, then it allows the buildings to be treated independently. Moving on, the Hawthorns has been raised a number of times. My understanding is that there was significant redevelopment of that site. It's now of modern style appearance, although originally the 4 new houses were shown with a sort of interwar architectural theme, which is what we've tried to duplicate here. The street scene, levels and design. You've seen the street scene. I've tried to graduate where the roof levels are, the road slopes, and the building is lower than number 58 and higher than Rother, which is a bungalow next door, but it seems to flow properly. Trees, there's a tree barrier in between this site and Rother. It needs treatment at the front. The trees are very, very high and could be classed as dangerous as far as the highway is concerned. Our proposal is to reduce by 2 trees next to the road and infill with a more compact vegetation. On amenity space, we'd be happy to amend it to some extent. I must admit it was considered with regard to the fact that the amenity wouldn't be used, although if it goes on as a separate building, then understandably it should be somewhat larger. And the other point is highways are agreed if the visibility splay is suitable for the new entrance, then it would be acceptable to them. That's my compressed reply.
Okay. Right then. To say it's a rerun of the last one, really. Councillor DeWaas?
Yeah, just to ask the agent, I mean, the officers talk about helpful amendments. Can you explain and perhaps confirm that you've worked with our officers in this development, as in its design?
So, sorry, could you repeat that one a bit? It was a bit faint.
So in the report, it says that, let me go to the actual section, that there were helpful amendments made by the applicant.
Oh yes, we reissued the drawings. The building was adjusted slightly, slimmed down, made lower, the consequence of a very, very, very late conservation officer report at the end has generated many of these points on the planner's final report. We didn't have time to respond to those.
Okay, any other questions, please? Councillor Sang, then Paul Bott.
Yeah, I just want to ask the agent. He said that there's a need for this building for personal reasons. I know in the previous applications, I wasn't part of them, but I could hear. What sort of reasons are there for this, for personal reasons?
Well, yeah, but perhaps Councillor Nazir would comment on the medical aspects of it, but it's for his son who is severely disabled from an earlier incident, such that he needs 2 full-time carers all of the time. It makes it quite a large facility. A treatment area is needed, and one of the large disabled bathrooms with a hoist, and also a lift to get him to and from the car.
Okay, well, I was aware of Councillor Nazir's son's situation, and again, we have the same rerun of what we had before, really. I don't think we need to go over the debate again, but the only issue that concerns me is the highways issue. And I think that, you know, I've said this many times, if we've got an objection from highways on visibility and highway safety, that needs to be resolved. So if members are minded to do anything other than the refusal, it needs to be a delegated decision, because that has to be resolved from a highways point of view. So I'll just put it on the table for what it is. Councillor Bott.
Okay. Can I interject just a second? In the report, not in that, not in the final report. Hello?
Hello? Can't. You're there to answer questions. I'm sorry. This has to stand
Okay.
in the constitution of this council. Sorry, Paul. What?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just say, Chair, it's very disappointing there's no tree officer today.
Well, I can't
The amount-
comment as to why not, but
The amount
Alice
of
has
trees.
made a note of it. Why is there no tree officer? Has he got COVID, or is he working from home, or is he not working from home?
The tree officer usually attends when he's actually presenting some of the reports,
Right.
and he relies on the comments that he's made within the application, which the case officers can answer,
understand.
like i.e. myself.
Well, can you answer it then, my question, Chair?
Yeah.
On the tree report.
Right, your question,
Right,
sir?
the last paragraph on the
Which
tree
is?
report. It is noted there are significant ground levels alterations between the site. That's the paragraph. What does the officer mean by that?
Alice,
Sorry,
can you answer that?
I think because there's a difference in ground levels, if they're doing any groundworks that would alter those ground levels, it could impact on the trees. So it could compact the roots, or if they were scraping out to lower the level, it could expose the roots, etc.
Through you, Chair, have we had that report? He was waiting for a report, the tree officer.
Leon, do you know if there was a tree report?
I'll just double check, but the paragraph does read that the details of the land level differences haven't actually been provided, and that was required to be able to understand the scale of the works. So at the moment, we haven't actually had that clarification put forward. I will just double check about the tree report. I believe we had a tree, no, a tree impact assessment wasn't provided, although we did have the street scenes. So yes, we were still awaiting that clarification.
Through you, Chair, how many trees on site has got to be removed? Sorry.
There?
I don't believe there was going to be the removal on site. It was that there was going to be the 2 meters from the boundary adjacent to Rother. I think the most there was going to be some trees retained on the submitted site plan, and the existing boundary is quite well furnished with evergreen trees. I don't think it was actually clarified whether the trees could be retained, and that's why we said we didn't actually have that information up front. And then the other point on trees was about the proposed access, and that was where we were concerned about the ground level excavations in order to construct the drive. And that was in close proximity to a large evergreen tree located to the frontage. And that, however, was shown for retention. But the main issue is to do with the stability of the trees and the potential for the failure of the long-term health.
So what trees are being removed, Chair? On the highways or on?
Coming, Councillor Bob.
Yes, please.
Leah, can you put the picture back up the drive?
Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, I think the answer, Councillor Bott, is we haven't got the information on how it's going to affect the trees. But from observing the site from a visit, we can see that there's a difference in levels, and because of the proximity of any proposed excavations or buildings, it's a concern that it may have an impact on those trees that are surrounding the site. And that's why we're recommending refusal on the failure to provide us with the evidence of it at the moment. If they provided us the evidence of it, we could assess it and we could make a more. But at the moment, going on what we've observed on site, because of the levels and the proximity, it's a concern that any excavations or compacting of earth or whatever could impact on those trees. Does that help?
Yeah, can I?
Sorry. My apologies.
Sorry.
I did call it, Councillor.
Yeah, sorry. I apologise, Chair. Just addressing Alison's point, in regards to us not knowing the impact on there, surely we could condition this on a method statement to be provided to protect the trees during and post construction. Whichever one wants to answer.
Rather than whisper it to Alison, Councillor, I'll try and explain. I think the issue we have here is the lack of any evidence before us as to what that harm may or may not be. So what we shouldn't be in a position of doing is to grant permission subject to conditions that ultimately means the permission may not be able to be implemented, is what I'm trying to say. So usually we need that information up front to inform the decision and to inform any conditions. It may not need mitigation, it may need multiple forms of mitigation, but to get to that point, you need that evidence-based survey up front. That's that.
Chair, thank you. Page 166 of the report. There's no objections from any responsible authorities, including the local highway authority. Yeah, no objection, subject to the inclusion of planning conditions in respect to pedestrian visibility display, parking, manoeuvring, gates, and vehicle footway crossing, if approved. Then obviously when we look at the actual reasons for refusal, point 5 contradicts that, which is the proposed new vehicle entrance and its width have not demonstrated. I think what we're referring to now. And if we could actually have the physical picture up, please, Leah, of the wall. A satisfactory pedestrian visibility display and highway pedestrian safety. So this is the point that you're referring to. Are we correct? It's the wall that we're looking at on Highgate Drive. You showed us a picture with, that's correct, yeah. Could you show the one next to Ruther? That's right. So, am I right, officers? No. The other way. Go back a bit, please.
Sorry, which photograph did you want to see?
That one there, that one's fine. So, Michael and Alison, or sorry, Leah, are we correct? So the issue obviously is the entrance is going to be put through that wall. Is that correct? And that's where the tree officer has raised their concerns. Yes?
I think to create a sufficient access for visibility, part of the wall would have to come down, if I'm reading this wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, Mike. And if part of the wall came down, it could impact on the trees because it could affect the root structure, etc. So because we haven't got that information, if we were to condition that, and then that information came through and it said, oh yeah, you've got to lose all of these trees, then that's something that you'd need to consider before making the decision.
Those trees, sorry, Councillor Rice, those trees haven't got TPOs on, have they?
No.
No. Because just if we continue from 0.5, so we're saying that if those trees were removed, or how many, it would have a detrimental impact on the whole character. And Chair, I know we're still asking questions here, but I go back to this report. We are again contradicting ourselves. We talk about the hawthorns. 0.2.
Yeah.
The proposal is considered would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the hawthorns. There's a picture there, Leah, if you could go through. Those look like footballers' houses now. I mean, where's it? You know,
dwellings, aren't
yes. So where's the conservation area there? I mean, there was another one, but other than the wall there that surrounds that, we damaged previously.
Yeah.
That conservation area has been damaged, but we're referring to that as part of our reasons for refusal. That this proposal, if this committee were minded to approve, would have a detrimental impact on that property there and that area. I appreciate that's a statement and not a question, but the point there that I was trying to point out was that coming back to if our highways haven't objected, as page 166 says, 0.5 they have, because we haven't agreed the entrance, but those trees aren't listed, are they? So it could be conditioned if the trees were. Yes?
Leah will tell us. Oh, were the trees protected, Leah?
No, the trees aren't protected.
Councillor Craddock, come back to Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Mindful of the personal circumstances of Councillor there, it does appear to be shoehorning a very substantial building, and I understand the reasons why, that it's got to be big, etc., into quite a corner of this plot, and then creating an additional access onto Highgate Road. It occurs to me that actually there doesn't need to be an additional access, because the driveway and the access through the main house, as this is going to be an ancillary building to the main house, is perfectly adequate to accommodate vehicles visiting that property. And again, in the future, it would be a potential saleable property, because it would be a completely separate dwelling with its own access. So if the driveway was through the main house, and I'm looking on Google Maps, the driveway seems quite substantial. There's more than sufficient gap between the existing property and that retaining wall, which we've just been discussing, to the house. I don't think I'd have any issue with it. The fact it's going to be its own property as a saleable item with its own access, I'm not comfortable with that development. Sorry.
Well, I made the point. If my members were minded to include, there's a highways issue, then it needs to be delegated to resolve that issue, because highway safety is paramount. But, you know, anybody else saying? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, basically, I'm on page 172, positive and proactive working with applicant. It says the applicant has been working and there were helpful amendments made to the application. But the first question, what amendments were there? And my second question is that you say it's going to have a detrimental impact in the local scene and in that vicinity. There's, as you can see in the previous pictures on the screen, there's been regeneration and development on the opposite side, and there's big buildings, a lot of houses there. How's that not really affected that? So that contradicts what we're saying now, that this is going to have a detrimental impact. So my question to officer, how can you have a rule that's different for the buildings that are built opposite there, and also that the amendments that were made, what were they, and what do you feel that it still doesn't have an impact?
I think in regard to, you know, it being prominent, you know, in regards to the bungalow next door, brother is significantly lower, and it would be an overbearing impact. And in terms of me look at the pattern development on the street, you know, it is going to be, you know, not in accordance with what is already there. And we're just looking at the street from, you know, that perspective from that street scene. In regards to amendments, I would just have to double check, if you give me 2 seconds, apologies.
Checking, the other question was, sorry, the last one. What is checking, I'm trying to save time here. Basically, is that it's going to be the same entrance from the existing development. So it's not going to be separate. It's going to be same entrance into.
That's not what the report says. The report says a separate entrance. That's why Councillor Crouch raised the issue. And that's why I said if members, and I'm not influencing you either way, but if you are minded to do what you did with the last one, we need to resolve that issue from a highway point of view. Councillor Crouch is quite right. Sorry, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just whilst Leah's looking at that, just in terms of responding on the Hawthorns, I have some experience with that site, given I was the case officer for this site. So you'll be probably good to know. I think the difference with this proposal with the Hawthorns, appreciate there has been some diminished effect to the local listing of itself, and that was reflected back some years ago when we looked at the proposal for the new dwellings on that site. I think what is different here is that the pattern of development of those new dwellings were created to try and reflect the pattern of development surrounding the Hawthorns, and we have something here that does come forward with the building line. It doesn't respect the ridge heights, etc. So there are some differences, but I do understand that. Yeah, some of that character has been diminished at that local listing, which is why we've ended up with the development surrounding it in the 4C. Just very quickly as well, which might be helpful for debate. The plan submitted shows that the dwelling is self-contained, does show the creation of a new access to serve that dwelling, and it does show that the dwelling would be fenced off entirely, so it's self-contained. So there is a question mark there if we are looking at something slightly different in terms of it being an ancillary building, then obviously there's just questions there about how that's dealt with so that it's seen as being self-contained separate dwelling.
Right, we've heard all the arguments. Leah, have you got the answer to Councillor Kisser's question?
Yes, apologies. I'm just trying to see the amendments here. I believe from quickly having a look that the dwelling was originally wider. I can't see that the access was changed, and then I think there might have been a stairwell previously. Apologies that I don't have a full clarification on these points.
I debated that. I think we need to move a resolution to suspend standing orders to finish the agenda. At 8:30, we'll have had the 3 hours. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Well, we've heard the arguments, and Councillor Craddock's raised the issue of the access, and I do believe that Highways are saying that it is a separate access, and they consider it isn't adequate. But I think if you are minded to support anything other than the refusal, then you should be delegating it to the authorities for the Highways to resolve that issue. It may be that they have to use the existing shared drive. It may also be that you wish to add the condition that it should be ancillary to the house and shouldn't be sold as a separate dwelling. I see no reason why that should not be the same as the one before. But I'm in your hands. I do have a resolution from anybody?
Chair, I'll move the resolution that you just put forward there. I think, yes, that we delegate to approve on very similar reasons, and that the access be along the lines of the same shared access, and this building is ancillary to the main hall.
So it's virtually the same conditions as the last one. Councillor Kisser, you seconded it. Okay. All those in favour of that then? Against? 2. Right. Nicola?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to clarify, committee have resolved to go against the officer recommendation, which was to refuse, and instead committee have resolved to delegate to grant subject to conditions and subject to highway concerns being resolved. It will also include the amendment and finalising of conditions in respect of construction management, hours of construction, removal of PD rights perhaps, and also materials and the property being ancillary to the original dwelling.
Thank you, Nicola. Right, there we are then. Just item 3, I think it was, which is Queen Mary School, there are no speakers on that. Can we accept that and move the resolution as set out? It's agreed. Thank you.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Good. Right. I think we've done that now. That's all of the public, isn't it? We're moving to private session then. Thank you.